Hi guys, and welcome to Bedtime History Relaxing. Tonight we climb into a lonely medieval lighthouse keeper's room while a winter storm rolls across the coast, rattling shutters, drowning footpaths, and turning the sea into a black, breathing animal below your feet. You're not in a cozy seaside inn with mulled wine and a polite little fireplace. No. Sadly, history has other plans. You're in a stone tower above freezing surf, responsible for keeping a flame alive so sailors do not mistake the rocks for open water. And honestly, you probably won't survive this if your idea of emergency preparation is one phone charger at 8%. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as always, tell me where you are listening from and what your local time is. It is always strangely comforting to imagine all these quiet rooms around the world, glowing softly in the dark. Now, dim the lights and let the cold coast gather around you. You wake before you fully understand where you are. At first, there is only sound. A deep boom rises from below, followed by a long, shivering rush, as if the whole earth has dragged a cloak of water across stone. Then comes the wind, pressing at the walls with a steady but patient force. It does not scream all the time. That would almost be easier. Instead, it breathes, waits, gathers itself, then strikes again, making the wooden shutters tremble in their iron fittings. You lie still beneath the coarse wool blanket. The room is small, very small. You can sense its edges before you see them. A curved stone wall rises beside you, damp with the night's breath. The floor is uneven beneath the rush matting. Somewhere close by, a clay lamp has burned low, its little flame reduced to a red eye floating in a cup of oil. It gives almost no light, but it gives enough to show the shape of the chamber. A stool, a chest, a peg with a cloak hanging from it, a bundle of rope, a narrow bed stuffed with straw that has absorbed every smell the coast can offer. Salt, smoke, old wool, cold stone, fish oil, damp leather, and the faint sourness of a body that has worked too long in weather that does not care about comfort. Above you, the tower continues upwards. Below you, it drops toward the rocks. Outside, the sea keeps arriving. You sit up slowly. The blanket slips from your shoulder, and the cold finds you at once. It is not a dramatic cold. It is worse than that. It is ordinary, persistent, and intimate. It touches your neck, your wrists, the backs of your hands. It creeps into the gap between tunic and skin. It waits inside your boots. Welcome to coastal winter. A mainstream historical truth about medieval sea travel is that sailors depended heavily on visible landmarks, fires, church towers, headlands, and local knowledge when moving near shore. Before modern charts, engines, radio, or electric lamps, a light on a dangerous coast could mean the difference between a safe approach and a hull broken open on hidden rock. Many medieval coastal lights were not elegant glass lanterns like later lighthouses. Some were simple beacon fires, raised braziers, lamps in towers, or flames tended near harbours, castles, monasteries, and watch points. Your tower is one of those practical places, not grand, not romantic, useful, and useful. In the Middle Ages, often means cold, smoky, and slightly dangerous. You swing your feet down and find the floor with your toes. The rushes are stiff. A few have frozen slightly where damp has crept in from the wall. You rub your hands together, then breathe into them. Your breath appears pale in the weak lamplight. The keeper is already awake. He sits near the shutter slit, wrapped in a patched cloak, one hand around a wooden cup that has long since stopped steaming. His hair is flattened from sleep. His beard is silvered with salt. He does not turn when you move. He only raises one finger, asking for quiet, then points toward the wall. You listen. At first, you hear nothing but storm. Then beneath it, another sound. A bell. Far off. Thin, irregular, It comes once, then vanishes, then again softer, carried and broken by the wind. The keeper lowers his hand. Not yet, he murmurs. His voice is rough, as if smoke has been living in it for years. You do not ask what he means. Not yet. You already know enough to feel the small tightening behind your ribs. The chamber's shutter cracks open for a moment under a gust, and a blade of freezing air slips across the room. The lamp trembles. The keeper curses softly, not with anger, but with the weary disappointment of a man who has repaired the same thing too many times. He rises, crosses the floor, and presses the wood back into place. The iron latch catches with a dull clack. You smell the sea more strongly now, not the gentle sea of summer paintings. This is winter sea, heavy, metallic, and alive. It smells of kelp torn from rocks, wet timber, old shells, fish scales, and storm-churned mud from the harbour mouth. Each gust seems to drag the whole coast through the room. Somewhere above, the main light needs tending. You know this because the keeper looks upward. There is always an upward in this play. The tower teaches it to your body, even when you sit, even when you lie down. Part of your mind remains aware of the stair rising above you, curling into darkness toward the flame. The light must be lit, oil must be carried, wicks must be trimmed, smoke must be watched. Fire must be protected from wind, wet, and its own hunger. A curious coastal belief, whispered in some places, claims that storms could confuse not only sailors but spirits too. Old women in fishing villages sometimes warned that lights should be kept steady because wandering souls, drowned men, or seafaries might follow a false flicker inland. Sensible people laughed at this. Sensible people also avoided being alone near the shore at midnight during a storm, which tells you exactly how confident they really were. The keeper bends over the chest and lifts out a small horn lantern. Its panels are cloudy, made from thin, scraped horn rather than clear glass. It gives a warm, blurred glow when lit, like moonlight trapped in honey. He checks the wick, sniffs the oil, then hands it to you. The handle is cold. You take it carefully. Your job tonight is simple. Carry what is needed. Listen. Do not fall. Do not let the flame go out. A nice, calm workplace. Then, the keeper opens a low cupboard and removes a stoppered vessel of oil. It is not pleasant oil. It has a thick smell, animal and smoky, likely from fish, whale, or other rendered fats depending on place and supply. Good clean lamp oil is a luxury. Here, the tower burns what it can get, and the sea does not pause to admire quality. He wraps the vessel in sacking and passes it to you. The cloth is damp at the edges. Your fingers grip it tightly. The first great blast of the storm hits the tower just as you stand. The room seems to lean. It does not. Of course, stone does not lean just because a little weather asks politely, but your body believes it for a moment. The lamp flame bends flat. The shutter groans. A few grains of old mortar drop from between the stones and patter onto the floor. The keeper listens again. So do you. The bell comes faintly once more. Then nothing. Scholars still argue whether many medieval coastal lights should be understood as true lighthouses, harbour beacons, religious lights, or local warning fires, because the surviving records are patchy and the words used in old documents can be slippery. A tower with a flame might be a navigational aid. It might also mark a shrine, a harbour entrance, a toll point, or a dangerous reef. Sometimes. Of course, it could be all of these at once. History enjoys making neat categories and then quietly ruining them. The keeper nods toward the stair. You follow. The door from the room is low, and you duck beneath its lintel. Beyond it, darkness coils upward. The spiral stair is cut into the thickness of the tower wall, narrow enough that your shoulder brushes stone on one side, while your elbow nearly touches the central column on the other. The steps are worn into shallow hollows by years of feet climbing, with oil, wood, rope, water, fear, and duty. Your lantern reveals only a few steps at a time. The walls sweat, cold droplets shine in cracks. The wind finds hidden gaps and turns them into whistles. Below, the keeper's room remains a dim pocket of human life, with its blanket, cup, chest, and stubborn little lamp. Above, the beacon waits, and beyond it, unseen but always present, ships feel their way through the storm. You begin to climb. Each step is careful. The oil vessel rests against your hip. The lantern swings from your other hand, making shadows climb ahead of you like silent companions. Your breath grows louder in the stairwell. The storm becomes muffled inside the stone, then suddenly loud again when you pass a narrow slit in the wall. Through it, blackness flashes with pale spray. For one heartbeat, you see the sea below, torn white around rocks. Then the stair turns, and it is gone. You keep climbing. The tower smells different here. Less of bedding and food, more of soot, pitch, old smoke, and damp stone. The smell thickens as you rise. It settles on your tongue. You swallow and taste salt. Behind you, the keeper follows with slow certainty. He does not hurry, which somehow makes the climb feel more serious. A young person rushes because the storm is frightening. An old keeper does not rush because he knows the storm will still be there when he arrives. That, unfortunately, is wisdom. Another gust hits. Somewhere above, metal rattles. You pause, clutching the wall. The keeper's voice comes from below. Keep moving. So you do, step after step, around and upward, into smoke, cold, and the duty of flame. The stair keeps turning. There is no straight path in this tower, no kind little landing where you can pause and pretend you're enjoying the architecture. The steps curl upward in a tight stone throat, each one damp at the edge and darker in the middle, where countless souls have polished the surface. Your lantern sways, and the light moves over the wall like slow water. The keeper climbs behind you. His breathing is steady, yours is not. You feel the weight of the oil vessel at your hip, and with every step you become more aware of how foolishly breakable everything is. One stumble, one slip, one careless knee against stone, and the precious oil could spill down the stair, leaving the beacon hungry at exactly the wrong hour. Medieval safety procedures, you notice, are mostly made of caution, prayer, and not being unlucky. A narrow slit in the wall appears to your left. You lean away from it as the wind slices through. The air strikes your cheek with wet cold, sharp enough to make your eye water. Through the opening you glimpse a broken piece of the coast below. Black rock, white foam, a line of surf exploding upward and disappearing into darkness. The tower seems taller from inside than it did from below, perhaps because your legs have begun to complain. You keep climbing. The keeper's voice comes softly from behind. Left foot near the wall. The middle is worn. You obey, placing your foot closer to the outer curve where the stone has more bite. The stair is not friendly, but it is honest. It tells you where people have walked before. It tells you where they slipped. It tells you that the tower has been doing this work longer than you have been alive, and that it will not move aside for your comfort. A dependable historical fact worth remembering here is that many medieval towers, castles, churches, and coastal structures use spiral stairs not simply because they looked pleasing, but because they saved space and fit within thick walls. In some defensive towers, the turn of the stair could also make ascent harder for an attacker. In your lighthouse, the same tight design keeps the structure compact and strong against wind, though it also makes carrying oil upward feel like a personal argument with mutinery. Your hand brushes the wall. The stone is wet, not soaked though, but slick with condensation and wind-driven massa damp. Salt has gathered in faint pale blooms along cracks. You can feel grit beneath your fingers. The tower is not sealed from the sea, it breathes with it, It sweats with it. It tastes of it. Even the darkness seems salted. Another opening passes, then another. The storm changes with each one. At one slit, it moans, at another, it hisses, at the next, it gives a sudden hollow roar, as if some giant has placed its mouth against the tower and decided to be dramatic for no useful reason. You pause halfway up, pretending to adjust your grip on the oil vessel. In truth, your thighs burn. The keeper notices. Of course, old people in history are unfairly good at noticing when younger people are failing. He says nothing, which is somehow worse. You climb again. The lantern's horn panes blur the world in amber. The flame inside tilts whenever the wind finds you, then rights itself with tiny stubbornness. You understand the flame now in a way you did not when it sat on the table below. It is not just light, it is work, it is attention, it is a small living thing that demands protection, food, and space to breathe. Ahead, the smell of smoke grows stronger, not the cosy smell of a cottage hearth. This is thick, greasy, bitter smoke, the kind that clings to woolen hair. It comes from the beacon chamber above, where the main fire or lamp has been fighting wet air for hours. You feel it before you see it. Your throat tightens, your eyes sting. The keeper coughs once behind you, a dry sound, then clears his throat, a lesser-known coastal tale, found in different forms along several European shorelines, claims that some beacon keepers rubbed charms into stebstones or tucked bits of blessed wax near the lantern to keep storms from taking the flame. Whether anyone here truly believes that is hard to say, but you notice a little darkened notch beside one step, and inside it, almost hidden by soot, sits a crumb of old wax and a twist of thread. Practical men can have practical superstitions. Why waste a possible advantage? The stair turns again. The ceiling lowers for a moment, forcing you to duck. Then the passage widens slightly, and the sound changes. You hear the fire now, not just the storm. It snaps and breathes somewhere above. Metal creaks. Something swings on a chain with a faint clink. Clink, clink. The keeper reaches past you and pushes open a small inner door. Warmth strikes your face. Not enough warmth to make the place comfortable. Let us not become unrealistic, but after the stare it feels almost luxurious. You step into the lantern chamber. It is not the clear glass room you might imagine from later centuries. There are no polished lenses turning in stone, no neat modern lamp, no brass railing gleaming like a museum exhibit. This chamber is rough, smoky, and alive with hard labour. A raised iron basket sits within a sheltered frame, holding a bed of coals and flame. Near it, shallow lamps rest in brackets, their wicks needing attention. Thick shutters protect the openings from the worst of the wind, but gaps remain, and through them the night flashes white with spray. The fire has burned low on one side. The keeper sees it at once. He points to a stone ledge. Set it there. You place the oil vessel down carefully. Your fingers ache from gripping it. The keeper moves with calm speed, taking an iron hook from the wall and drawing part of the brazier toward him. Sparks lift and vanish into smoke. The wind presses against the shutters. The fire bends, recovers, and glows brighter where the coals are stirred. You hold the horn lantern higher. Its softer light reveals tools hanging from pegs, tongs, hooks, a knife for trimming wick, a scoop for ash, a folded cloth stiff with old grease. There is a bucket of sand. There is a small barrel that probably holds more oil or rendered fat. There are spare wicks twisted from fibre, rough and uneven, waiting like pale cords. Historians still argue whether lighthouse keepers in smaller medieval coastal stations were specialised workers, monks, local toll servants, fishermen taking turns, or men hired seasonally by harbour authorities. The answer likely changed from place to place. In some regions, a monastery might maintain a guiding light as an act of charity and religious duty. in others. A town or lord might support it because safe ships meant trade, tolls, and fewer angry merchants asking why their wool or wine had become decoration for the seabed. The keeper removes the stopper from the oil vessel, the smell rises, heavy, fishy, a little sweet, a little rotten. Your modern mind, spoiled by clean candles and electric bulbs, would like to file a complaint, but the flame accepts it without judgment. Oil is oil, light is light, survival rarely smells elegant. He pours slowly into a waiting lamp, and you watch the wick darken as it drinks. Then he trims the blackened end of another wick, pinching it between a little knife and thumb, careful not to waste more than needed. The charred piece falls into an ash dish. The lamp brightens, then steadies. Outside, the storm shifts. For a moment, the shutters rattle so violently you expect them to fly open. The keeper reaches across and fastens an extra wooden bar into place. You help, pushing with both hands while cold air bites through the crack. Your palms feel the vibration of the wind in the wood. It is like touching the chest of some huge sleeping creature that is not asleep at all. Then the bar settles. The chamber holds. The flame continues. You realize, slowly, that this is the work. Not one heroic action, not a dramatic rescue every hour, just tending, watching, adjusting, climbing, carrying, feeding the fire before it fails, listening before danger becomes visible. Below you, somewhere in the darkness, the keeper's room waits with its straw bed and low lamp. Above and around you, the winter night presses close, far beyond the tower. Ships are moving through black water, and no one aboard them knows your name. They only know, if they are lucky, that a light still burns where the rocks begin. The keeper glances at the flame, then at you. He nods once. Not praise, not warmth, just approval enough to keep you standing. Together, you turn back toward the stair, carrying smoke in your hair and salt on your tongue, while the beacon behind you throws its small, stubborn warning into the storm. The descent feels shorter. Perhaps it is because gravity finally decides to cooperate. Perhaps it is because your legs already know the rhythm of the stair. Or perhaps it is because the thought of returning to the keeper's room has become unexpectedly appealing. Not that the room is comfortable. Let us keep our expectations historically appropriate. It is merely less uncomfortable than everywhere else. The lantern chamber fades above you as you follow the keeper downward. Smoke lingers in your clothes. The scent clings to your hair. Every time you blink, your eyes feel slightly gritty from soot. Behind you, the beacon continues its patient work, casting warning light through gaps in the storm. Step after step, the stair curls lower. The sounds change again. Above, the fire crackles. Below, the room begins to announce itself through smaller noises, a faint scrape, the creak of wood, the gentle rattle of something hanging from a peg whenever the tower shudders beneath a gust. The keeper carries the empty oil vessel. You carry the lantern. Neither of you speaks. There is a particular sigh that develops between people who have practical tasks to complete. It is not awkward, it is not unfriendly. Words simply become less necessary than movement. When you finally reach the room and duck through the doorway, the chamber greets you with familiar smells: wool, salt, smoke, leather, cold stone, and, faintly, food. The keeper notices your glance toward the corner where several supplies are stored. He smiles for the first time tonight. It is not a large smile, more a brief surrender of seriousness. Thinking about supper already? You cannot honestly deny it. The climb has reminded your stomach that it exists. The room appears slightly different now that you've seen the upper lantern chamber. Before, it seemed cramped. Now it feels almost sheltered. The low ceiling traps a little warmth. The curved walls soften the wind's voice. Even the narrow bed appears more inviting than before. A widely accepted historical fact is that food storage was a constant concern in isolated medieval coastal locations. Harsh weather could delay boats, block roads, or cut off supplies for days. Keepers, fishermen, Monks and watchmen often maintained reserves of dried fish, grain, hard bread, beans, onions, and preserved foods precisely because winter storms had a habit of ignoring schedules. The keeper kneels beside a wooden chest, the hinges groan. Inside lies the practical menu of coastal survival: a cloth sack of oats, several onions, a hard wheel of cheese, a bundle of dried fish, a small loaf that has already survived enough days to qualify as building material, and tucked near the back, wrapped carefully in cloth, a handful of precious apples that have somehow endured deep into winter. The sight of them feels almost luxurious. The keeper removes one and examines it critically. The apple appears to have lost an argument with time, but only barely. He nods with satisfaction and places it aside. A reward, perhaps. The storm booms against the tower. The room trembles very slightly. You're beginning to notice something. Every object here has been chosen because it earns its place. There are no decorations, no unnecessary comforts, no collection of random possessions gathered through impulse purchases and online sales. Medieval life, particularly in a lonely coastal tower, encourages a level of discipline that would make modern storage consultants weep with joy. The keeper reaches for several pieces of dried fish. The smell arrives immediately. Strong, persistent, impossible to ignore. If you've ever opened a refrigerator and wondered whether something inside has become self-aware, you possess a rough understanding of the aroma. The keeper seems entirely unconcerned. He breaks pieces into a small iron pot. Water follows, then oats, then onion. The result promises to become something between a soup and an argument. A fire crackles in a small hearth built into the wall. The flames are modest but dependable. They lick at blackened stones that have known years of smoke. Above them hangs the pot. Soon the room fills with steam. You sit on the stool and stretch your hands toward the warmth. Outside, darkness deepens. Not that much daylight remained to begin with. Winter evenings along northern coasts arrive with determination. Clouds swallow the horizon. Sea mist thickens. The world beyond the shutters shrinks into a realm of wind and imagination. The keeper busies himself with preparations. He checks a coil of rope, examines a hammer, inspects several spare lantern wicks, folds a blanket. Everything has its place, everything has a purpose. One curious tradition recorded in some coastal communities involved hanging unusual objects near doors or windows to encourage good fortune at sea. Dried seabirds, carved driftwood, oddly shaped shells, and even pieces of ancient bone occasionally found their way into local folklore. Whether these objects were serious protections or simply comforting habits remains difficult to determine. Human beings have always enjoyed the feeling that luck can be persuaded with enough creativity. Your gaze settles on a small object hanging from a peg. It appears to be a smooth stone with a natural hole through its centre. The keeper notices, found it on the beach years ago. He shrugs. Some call them hagstones. You nod. The stone swings gently as the tower vibrates beneath another gust. Perhaps it is a charm, perhaps it is simply an interesting rock. History often refuses to clarify such things. The soup thickens, steam fogs the room. The scent becomes increasingly pleasant, not because the ingredients have changed, because hunger is a remarkably talented cook. The keeper ladles portions into wooden bowls. You take yours carefully. The bowl warms your hands. The first mouthful is hot enough to demand respect. You wait. Try again. Better. The flavour is simple. Fish, onion, oats, salt, a little smoke, nothing extraordinary. Yet after the cold stare and the storm outside, it feels deeply satisfying. You eat slowly. The keeper does the same. For a time, only the sounds of spoons and weather fill the room. The tower groans occasionally. The fire settles. Wind brushes against the shutters like enormous fingers searching for entry. Somewhere far above, the beacon continues burning. Researchers continue to discuss how many medieval coastal lights operated consistently throughout winter months, particularly in smaller communities. Maintaining fuel, labour, and supplies required resources that not every settlement possessed. Some lights likely burned only during specific seasons, while others depended on local circumstances. The surviving evidence offers fascinating clues but not always complete certainty. You finish the soup, the warmth spreads through your chest. The keeper cuts small slices of cheese, then, after a moment's consideration, divides the surviving apple, half for him, half for you. The fruit is slightly soft, still sweet. The flavour feels almost shocking after weeks or months of preserved foods. You chew slowly, unwilling to waste a bite. Outside, another wave strikes the rocks. The sound reaches the tower a moment later. Boom, then rushing water, then silence, then wind again. The cycle repeats endlessly. You begin to understand how coastal people learned patience. The sea teaches repetition. Wave after wave, tide after tide, storm after storm, year after year. The keeper rises and crosses to the shutter. He opens it a fraction. Instantly cold air pours inside. You hear the full voice of the storm, wild, restless, powerful. For a moment you glimpse darkness moving beyond the opening. Not empty darkness, living darkness, filled with spray, snow, and flying foam. The keeper studies the horizon, or rather the place where the horizon should be. Tonight there is only blackness. He closes the shutter again, the latch clicks. The room becomes a world unto itself once more. A small world, a warm world, a human world surrounded by winter sea. You pull the blanket around your shoulders. The keeper adds another piece of wood to the hearth. The fire answers with a shower of sparks. The light dances across the curved stone walls. The hanging rope casts long shadows. The hagstone turns gently on its cord. For the first time since arriving, you feel settled, not comfortable exactly. The straw mattress still exists. The cold still waits in every corner. The storm is certainly not finished, but you know the room now. You know where the supplies are kept. You know the smell of the lantern oil. You know the sound of the beacon above. You know the keeper's quiet habits. The tower no longer feels entirely foreign. Outside, winter rules the coast. Inside, a handful of ordinary objects hold back the darkness. A bowl, a blanket, a fire, a lantern, and people willing to tend them. The keeper glances toward the stair leading upward. Soon enough another watch will be needed, another climb, another check of the flame, but not quite yet. For now, you sit beside the hearth while the storm prowls around the tower, and the keeper's room settles into the long breathing rhythm of a winter night. The keeper does not let the quiet last too long. It would be pleasant if the world paused after supper, giving you time to sit beside the hearth, digest your oats, and reconsider every life choice that led to sleeping inside a tower during a winter storm. But medieval weather, like most medieval responsibilities, has poor manners. The keeper sets down his bowl, wipes the edge clean with a piece of cloth, and looks toward the stair. You follow his gaze. Above, beyond the ceiling, beyond the turning steps, the beacon burns, or perhaps it weakens. That is the trouble with a flame you cannot see. You must imagine it constantly. You picture it leaning in the wind, eating through oil, sending smoke up into the chamber, glowing against the shutters. You picture it shrinking too. A thin red tongue, a dark wick, a sailor beyond the rocks looking towards the shore and finding only blackness. The keeper rises. Again, he says, one word. Perfectly unfair. You pull the blanket from your shoulders and stand. The warmth leaves you immediately, as though it had only been visiting out of politeness. Your boots meet the rushes. Your fingers find the horn lantern again. The keeper lifts a smaller vessel of oil this time, along with a bundle of prepared wick and a pair of iron tongs. The fire in the wall hearth sighs behind you as you step toward the door. The room, which seemed cramped only minutes ago, now looks like a paradise of civilization. A stool, a bowl, a blanket, a hearth, luxury apparently is relative. You duck into the stair and begin climbing. The second ascent feels different. Your body knows the tight turn now. It knows the worn dips in the centre of the steps. It knows to keep close to the outer wall, where the stone is less polished by old feet. Still, the climb asks payment from your legs. The tower does not care that you recently ate. The lantern glow climbs ahead. Behind you, the keeper moves slowly but steadily, his tools knocking softly against one another. Outside, the storm has thickened. You hear it through the narrow wall slits. Earlier the wind pushed and roared. Now something finer taps against stone. Snow, perhaps, or sleet carried sideways from the sea. It makes a dry whispering sound wherever it strikes the openings, then vanishes into the dark. Written sources from the medieval period make clear that coastal navigation often depended on simple repeated signals, especially light, bells, and known landmarks. A steady beacon could warn sailors away from rocks or guide them toward a harbour mouth, while a changing or hidden light could be dangerous. It was not modern navigation, it was more fragile, more local, and much more dependent on human attention. In other words, one sleepy keeper with cold fingers could become part of an entire ship's fate. No pressure, obviously. You reach the lantern chamber. The heat meets you first, then the smoke. The beacon is still alive, but it is struggling. The flame in the iron basket has sunk low on one side, its glow partly buried beneath grey ash and charred fuel. One of the smaller lamps has dimmed until its wick gives more smoke than light. The shutters tremble in their frame, and every narrow gap lets in a ribbon of wet. Cold air. The keeper makes a sound in his throat, not panic, disapproval. This is somehow worse. The storm has received a poor performance review. He hands you the horn lantern and points to the lamp bracket. Hold steady. You lift the lantern close enough to illuminate his hands, but not so close that the wind can steal both flames at once. The keeper trims the smoky wick with a small knife. Blackened fibre drops into the ash dish. He pours oil slowly, carefully, never wasting a thread more than needed. The wick drinks, darkens, then catches. At first the flame is blue and small, then yellow, then steadier. The chamber brightens, not much, but enough. Outside the shutter gap, the darkness flickers with your light. You imagine it reaching outward, thinning through snow, scattering across spray, finding the sea in broken pieces, somewhere beyond the rocks. Sailors may be searching for it. The keeper moves to the brazier. He uses the tongs to lift a half-burned piece of fuel, then settles it where the coals glow strongest. Sparks rise and spin. The wind catches smoke and flings it sideways. Your eyes water. You blink hard. An odd maritime superstition held in some communities that a flame which suddenly burned green or blue warned of spirits at sea, wrecked sailors, or strange weather coming. More ordinary explanations include salt, damp fuel, mineral traces, and all the practical things that never sound quite as exciting around a winter hearth. Still, if a tired keeper saw an eerie colour in the fire at midnight, with the sea hammering below, you can forgive him for becoming a little poetic. The keeper opens a shutter just a hand's width. The storm rushes in. Cold strikes your face like thrown water. The flame bends sharply. The keeper grips the shutter with both hands and peers out. You step closer without being asked. For a moment, the world beyond the tower appears in fragments, a wall of snow, a flash of white surf, black sea heaving below. Farther out, nothing. Then, for one breath, a shape, you're not sure you truly see it, a darker darkness beyond the surf. A mast, perhaps, or a sail, or only storm cloud dragging low across the water. The keeper sees it too. His whole body stills. The The shutter trembles violently in his hands. "There!" he says. You stare until your eyes ache. The shape appears again, then vanishes behind snow and spray. A ship. Maybe. The thought changes the room. Before, the beacon was duty in the abstract, fire for unknown sailors, light for unseen hulls. But now the sea has placed someone beyond the tower, someone made of timber, rope, wet wool, fear, and hope. Men may be on that deck, bracing themselves against the rail. Someone may be holding a line with numb fingers. Someone may be watching for this very light. The keeper closes the shutter. The latch lands hard. "More flame," he says. The work becomes quicker. You feed him oil when he asks. You hold the lantern. You steady the wick bundle. You move the sand bucket closer in case sparks fall badly. The keeper opens the draft slightly, then closes it halfway when smoke twists too thickly. He knows the chamber the way a sailor knows a deck in darkness. His hands find the hooks without looking. His boots avoid the loose stone near the brazier. He reads the fire as if it were speaking. The historical record remains incomplete on exactly how bright many smaller medieval coastal lights could be. Some may have been visible only in fair conditions and over short distances. Others, especially on high points or near important harbours, could guide vessels more reliably. Weather changed everything. Snow, fog, smoke, rain, and sea spray could swallow light almost at once. That means a keeper did not merely make fire. He fought the air itself for visibility. The flame grows. It lifts higher in the brazier, licking through the fuel, throwing orange light against the soot-dark walls. The smaller lamps burn more cleanly now. The chamber warms until your cheeks sting from the contrast of heat and cold. The keeper opens the shutter again. This time, he does not open it wide, only enough. The light pushes out through the storm. You stand beside him, shoulder close to the rough straw, and look into the night. There. Again. The ship's shape appears between curtains of snow. You see what might be a mast leaning, not broken, but strained. A pale scrap of sail flaps, then disappears. The vessel seems to rise and fall in impossible movements. Lifted by black water and then swallowed behind it, the keeper mutters a prayer, not loudly, not theatrically, just a few words offered into wind. Then he turns away and tends the flame once more. You understand something then. The beacon cannot pull the ship to safety, and it cannot calm the waves. It cannot mend a sail or deepen a channel or move the rocks. It can only say, "Here is danger, here is land. Here is the edge of the world you must not strike." Sometimes that is enough, sometimes it is not. A gust slams the tower so hard that your lantern nearly swings from your hand. You grip it with both fists. The keeper catches the oil vessel before it tips. Sparks leap from the brazier. One lands on the floor and dies against damp stone. You laugh once, very quietly, from nerves rather than amusement. The keeper glances at you. "Good," he says. You are awake. That, apparently, is the standard. Outside, the storm beats on. Inside, the first flames against the sea rise brighter, throwing their warning across snow, spray, and darkness, while you stand in the smoke beside the old keeper and try to keep your small part of the night from going out. Eventually, even vigilance must eat. The beacon burns stronger now. The distant shape beyond the storm has vanished from sight, swallowed once more by snow, darkness, and the endless rise and fall of the sea. Whether the vessel has found safer water or merely drifted beyond visibility, neither you nor the keeper can say. The flame has been the lamps have been trimmed. For the moment, the tower can do no more. So you descend. The spiral stair welcomes you back with damp stone, narrow footing, and the lingering scent of smoke. After enough trips, you begin to recognize individual sounds. There is a loose scrape on the 23rd step, a faint whistle near one of the wall slits, a hollow echo near the lower bend where the tower widens slightly. Places become familiar in strange ways, not through beauty, through repetition. By the time you duck into the keeper's room again, the hearth has settled into a comfortable orange glow. The fire no longer crackles energetically, it murmurs to itself. Small pieces of wood collapse inward, embers pulse beneath grey ash. The room feels warmer than before, not warm, merely warmer. An important distinction in medieval winter life. The keeper hangs the tongs on their peg and removes his outer cloak. Moisture has gathered on the fabric where snow and sea spray found him. He drapes it near the hearth, but not too close. Coastal people learn patience with drying, rush the process, and something scorches. Delay too long, and everything smells permanently damp. You settle onto the stool again. The tower shudders gently beneath a gust, then settles, then shudders again. The rhythm has become almost familiar. Surviving records from medieval coastal communities reveal that winter storms shaped daily life far beyond the shoreline itself. Fishing schedules, trading voyages, food supplies, communication between villages, and even local economies could be disrupted for days. Weather forecasts did not exist. Communities observed clouds, winds, birds, tides, and experience. Sometimes they guessed correctly. Sometimes the sea reminded them who was actually in charge. The keeper opens a small wooden cupboard built into the wall. Inside are several items that seem entirely unremarkable, until you realize they represent survival. A sack of barley, 2 onions, a wedge of cheese, dried herbs, a clay jug, a small pouch of salt, a few precious candles. Each object has crossed roads, rivers, fields, and markets before reaching this isolated tower. Every item has a story behind it. The keeper lifts the jug. Beer. You nod. The drink pours into 2 wooden cups. It is not the sparkling beverage modern advertisements promise beneath mountain waterfalls. Medieval ale is often cloudy, mildly sour, and entirely unconcerned with presentation. Yet it is safer than many water sources and deeply woven into everyday life. You take a cautious sip. The flavour is earthy, a little bitter, a little sweet, not unpleasant. The keeper seems pleased by your reaction, which suggests newcomers have made worse faces. Outside, another wave strikes the rocks below. The impact travels through stone. You feel it more than hear it. The tower responds with a deep vibration that seems to rise through the floor itself. For a moment, you imagine the sea testing the structure, not attacking, simply checking. Still there, still standing. Good. I'll return in 30 seconds. A peculiar belief once circulated in parts of coastal Europe that storms possessed personalities. Fishermen occasionally spoke of certain winds as stubborn, jealous, playful, or angry. Modern meteorology may disagree, but after listening to a gale hammer a tower for 6 uninterrupted hours, you begin to understand the temptation. The weather feels less like a condition and more like a visitor with very strong opinions. The keeper adds another piece of wood to the fire. Its bark crackles. A pocket of trapped moisture hisses. Tiny sparks drift upward before vanishing. The room fills with a pleasant mixture of scents. Wood smoke, warm ale, wool, damp leather, salt, the smell of a place occupied by human beings rather than abandoned to weather. You glance around more carefully now. The chamber reveals details overlooked earlier. A repaired crack in the wall, a shelf carved directly into stone, marks scratched beside the doorway, perhaps measurements, perhaps tallies, perhaps nothing more than idle carving during long watches. The bed occupies one corner. Calling it narrow is generous. It appears designed for sleeping and absolutely nothing else. The mattress bulges unevenly beneath its wool blanket. Straw shifts whenever someone sits or rises. Every movement likely produces a sound similar to stepping on a basket of dry leaves. The keeper notices your stare. Better than the floor. A difficult statement to challenge. You nod. He nods back. Matter settled. Researchers continue to examine how isolated lighthouse or beacon keepers truly were during the medieval period. Some towers stood close to busy harbours with frequent visitors. Others occupied remote headlands where storms could cut communication for days. The experience varied dramatically depending on location and local resources. In some places, loneliness may have been the hardest part of the job. In others, the weather claimed that honour. The firelight dances across the curved walls. Shadows lengthen and shrink. The hanging rope casts a looping shape that resembles a sleeping snake. A bucket becomes a crouching figure until the light shifts again. Human eyes have always enjoyed inventing mysteries in poor lighting. The keeper removes a small object from a shelf, a carved piece of wood. You take it when offered. The carving depicts a ship, simple, crude, yet surprisingly expensive. Its sail bulges, its bow rises. Tiny cuts suggest ropes and rigging. The maker understood ships, perhaps because he spent half his life watching them. The keeper shrugs. My father made it. The answer arrives quietly. You turn the carving in your hands. Its edges have been worn smooth by years of handling. A keepsake, a memory, a connection stretching backward through generations. It strikes you that coastal life often worked this way. Knowledge passed from parent to child, tides remembered, dangerous rocks named, seasonal winds observed, experience accumulated like layers of salt on stone. Outside, the storm continues writing its own lessons. The shutter rattles, the latch jumps once. The keeper glances toward it automatically. Habit, nothing more. One particularly strange tale preserved in coastal folklore tells of phantom ships carrying lanterns that lured sailors toward danger. Stories differed from place to place. Sometimes the vessels were crewed by ghosts, sometimes by spirits, sometimes by sailors who had broken sacred promises. Such stories likely served as cautionary reminders not to trust every light seen through fog or storm. Still, they make excellent material for unsettling conversations after midnight. The keeper chuckles when you mention the possibility. Real ships are trouble enough. A fair point. He retrieves a small whetstone and begins sharpening a knife. The sound is soft, still against stone, back and forth, back and forth. The rhythm joins the other sounds inhabiting the room. Fire, wind, sharpening, breathing. Occasional distant surf, and together they form the music of the tower. You sip more ale. The warmth spreads through your chest. Fatigue begins settling into your shoulders. Not overwhelming exhaustion, just the steady awareness that the day has been long and the night is only beginning. The keeper seems unaffected. Years of practice, perhaps, or stubbornness. History rarely distinguishes between the two. The fire burns lower. The room grows quieter. Even the storm seems to retreat briefly, gathering strength elsewhere along the coast before returning for another assault. You listen. Beyond the walls lies darkness. Beyond the darkness lies sea. Beyond the sea lie ships, villages, monasteries, markets, and countless people sleeping through the same storm. Yet inside the tower, the world is narrowed to a few feet of stone and firelight. The keeper finishes sharpening the knife, tests the edge with his thumb. Satisfied, he returns it to its place. Everything returns to its place eventually. The rope, the tools, the cups, the carving, the blanket. Even you, gradually, seem to belong here a little more than before. The room still smells of salt. The walls still sweat with damp. The bed still looks deeply suspicious. Yet the chamber feels less foreign now. You know where the supplies rest. You know the sound of the latch. You know how the beacon breathes above. You know which floorboard creaks. You know which gusts are ordinary and which deserve attention. Outside, the winter coast remains wild and unforgiving. Inside, supper lingers in your stomach. Ale warms your hands, and the hearth paints gentle light across stone. For a little while, that is enough. The quiet does not last. It never truly does on a coast like this. For perhaps half an hour, perhaps less, the tower settles into a rhythm that almost resembles peace. The fire glows steadily. The keeper sharpens tools, checks supplies, and occasionally glances toward the stair. The storm continues its endless conversation with the rocks below, but its voice softens slightly, as though pausing to gather strength. Then a sound reaches you, faint, distant, different. You sit upright immediately. The keeper does the same, not because the sound is loud, because it is unfamiliar. The two of you listen. The room becomes still. The fire crackles once. The wind presses against the shutters. Then the sound returns, a bell, far away, thin enough that you almost doubt hearing it. The keeper rises at once, no hesitation, no discussion. He moves to the shutter and opens it a narrow fraction. Cold air rushes inside. Snowflakes swirl briefly through the gap before melting against the stone floor. You hear it again. Bell, pause, bell, pause. The intervals are irregular, not the measured ringing of a church, not the cheerful sound of a harbour, something else. The keeper closes the shutter. His expression reveals very little. Years of experience have apparently trained every unnecessary emotion out of his face. Could be a buoy. He pauses. Could be a ship. That you are not particularly reassured. A detail preserved in numerous maritime records is that bells played an important role in navigation and warning systems long before modern communication. Bells could mark harbour entrances, dangerous channels, anchored vessels, or prestigious sites near the shore. In poor visibility, sound often travelled where light could not. During storms, however, wind could twist direction and distance, making even familiar signals frustratingly difficult to interpret. The keeper crosses the room. From a peg he removes a heavier cloak, then another lantern, then a coil of rope. None of these actions suggest good news. You stand. The keeper notices. Stay inside. You look at the rope, then at the lantern, then at him. He sighs. A man who has spent years alone in a tower clearly misses the luxury of giving orders that nobody question. Fine, he says. You carry the lantern. Apparently promotion comes quickly in isolated workplaces. The two of you climb the stair again. The familiar spiral seems steeper now, perhaps because fatigue is beginning to settle into your legs, perhaps because uncertainty makes every step heavier. The lantern chamber greets you with smoke and orange light. The beacon still burns well. That at least is encouraging. The keeper moves immediately toward one of the viewing gaps. He listens, not looks, listens. You do the same. At first there is only weather, wind, surf, the occasional hiss of sleet. Then, very faintly, the bell returns, and somewhere beyond the darkness, bell, silence, bell. The sound seems to drift. The keeper frowns. You realize this concerns him more than he wishes to admit. Outside, visibility has become miserable. Snow and sea spray mingle in the air until they become nearly indistinguishable. The darkness itself appears textured, filled with moving fragments of white. Even the beacon's light seems swallowed after a short distance. The keeper opens a shutter slightly. The wind immediately attacks the room. Cold air surges inside. The flame bends. Smoke whirls sideways. You brace yourself against the stone wall. Together you stare into the storm. Nothing, nothing, then perhaps something. A flicker. No, only foam. The sea has become an expert liar tonight. An unusual belief once found among certain fishing communities claimed that bells heard during storms sometimes belonged to vessels that no longer existed. According to local tales, drowned crews continued sailing fog-covered waters, their warning bells ringing across the waves. Practical sailors generally laughed at such stories during daylight. Curiously, they laughed much less after midnight. The keeper closes the shutter again. His face remains unreadable, but he immediately checks the fuel level in the lamps. That tells you enough. If someone is out there, the light matters. The two of you spend the next stretch of time maintaining the beacon. Oil, wicks, fuel, small adjustments, nothing dramatic, and yet everything feels dramatic because of the bell. Every distant ring seems to tug at the edge of your attention. Bell, pause, wind, bell, pause. Darkness. The sound becomes part of the storm. Researchers examining medieval coastal safety systems often note how limited emergency response could be. A modern rescue service can deploy boats, radios, aircraft, and coordinated communication. Medieval communities possessed courage, local knowledge, and whatever resources happened to be nearby. Many rescues depended entirely on visibility, weather, and timing. Sometimes help arrived. Sometimes it simply could not. That reality settles heavily in the room. The keeper knows it. You know it. The bell continues. Eventually, the keeper produces a small brass horn from a shelf. You had not noticed it before. The instrument is plain and dented from use. He carries it to the viewing gap, opens the shutter, raises the horn, then blows. The sound is surprisingly powerful. A deep note rolls outward into the storm. The tower seems to vibrate around it. The keeper waits, listens, nothing. Then he sounds it again. The note travels into darkness. You imagine it racing across the waves, weaving through snow, bouncing from cliffs and surf. The keeper lowers the horn, waits, and waits. At first, there is only wind. Then, somewhere beyond sight, the bell rings once more. This time it seems closer. Not much, just enough. The keeper exhales slowly. Not relief exactly, more confirmation. Someone is there. You suddenly become very aware of the distance between human beings and disaster. A few miles, perhaps less. One vessel, one reef, one mistaken course, one broken mast. The difference between survival and tragedy often seems absurdly small. The beacon crackles. The keeper adds more fuel. Outside, the storm continues raging. Yet the work inside the lantern chamber remains steady. Feed the flame. Check the lamps. Watch the sea. Listen. Repeat. Again and again. The simplicity feels almost sacred. A task repeated correctly enough times becomes its own kind of prayer. The bell continues intermittently. Sometimes near, sometimes distant. The shifting wind plays tricks with the direction. Several times you think it has vanished entirely. Then it returns. The keeper eventually hands you the horn. You stare at it. He nods. Apparently it is your turn. You open the shutter. Instant regret. The cold attacks immediately. Snow strikes your face. A wind pushes against your chest. You raise the horn. Take a breath and blow. The note emerges unevenly. Not terrible. Not impressive. Certainly not inspiring enough to appear in any heroic ballads. But it carries. The keeper grunts approval. A rare honour. You listen. For a long moment nothing answers. Then comes the bell. Faint, but present. The exchange continues. Light, bell, horn, wind, darkness, signal, response. Human beings reaching toward one another across impossible weather. The longer you listen, the more the storm feels alive with unseen stories. A crew somewhere, fighting waves. Families asleep in distant villages. Fishermen sheltering in harbours. Monks hearing the wind around monastery walls. Merchants worrying about cargo. And here, inside a stone tower, two figures keeping a flame alive. Hours earlier, the beacon felt like maintenance. Now it feels personal. The bell has changed everything. You never see the ship, not clearly, not tonight. Only hints, possibilities. Dark shapes swallowed by weather. Yet the knowledge remains. Someone is out there. Someone hears the horn. Someone sees the light. The keeper returns the brass instrument to its place. The beacon burns steadily. The storm continues. and the night stretches onward, filled with bells, wind, and the stubborn determination of people who refuse to let darkness have the final word. The bell fades before anyone can decide what it meant. For a while, you and the keeper remain in the lantern chamber, staring into the storm through narrow gaps, listening for another thin note beneath the roar. The beacon burns. The horn rests nearby. Your fingers ache from cold and from gripping things too tightly, as if determination alone can improve the weather. Then the sea answers with nothing. No bell, no cry, no scrape of hull against rock. Only wind, sleet, and the steady thunder of waves throwing themselves against the coast below. The keeper waits longer than you expect. He does not trust silence quickly. At last he closes the shutter, checks the latch, and gives the flame one final look. The light is strong now, feeding well, breathing through its controlled draft. It throws orange along the smoke-stained wall and glows through the chamber openings like an eye refusing to close. You descend again. The stair is darker this time because your thoughts have gone outward, beyond the stone, toward the unseen ship and the fading bell. You imagine sailors bent low on a deck, faces wet with spray, mouths tight with effort. You imagine a pilot trying to judge distance from a light half hidden by snow. You imagine the cruel black line of rocks beneath the surf. Then the lower room receives you. The keeper enters first and pauses near the shutter. He does not open it immediately. Instead, he listens. The room seems to listen with him. Even the hearth burns more softly, as if it understands. Outside, the storm has changed again. The wind is less sharp now, but the sea is louder. Beneath the howl and rattle comes a heavier, slower sound, a deep rushing pull followed by the hard crash of water climbing stone. The keeper nods to himself. Tide's coming in? Of course it is, because apparently the storm looked at the night and decided it needed a second problem. You move toward the shutter as he opens it a little. The cold comes in first, then the sound, then the smell. Salt, weed, wet rock, and the deep mineral breath of the exposed shore being swallowed by water. Through the narrow gap, you see little at first. Darkness folds everything together. Then the beacon above swings a faint glow across the lower rocks, and the scene arranges itself for one brief moment. The path is still there. Barely. A raised causeway of stone and packed earth runs from the base of the tower toward the mainland, broken in places by puddles that catch pale light. Earlier, it must have been passable at low tide, a rough route for keepers, villagers, fuel, and supplies. Now water slides across its edges, creeping in from both sides. The sea is taking it, slowly, patiently, without drama, which somehow makes it worse. Medieval coastal communities often built paths, quays, fish traps, and causeways according to the rhythm of tides, and anyone living near such places learned that time was not measured only by bells or daylight. It was measured by water. A road might exist at noon and vanish by dusk. A safe crossing could become a channel. A familiar beach could become a trap if fog, storm, or carelessness made someone misjudge the turning tide. You watch the causeway disappear. The water does not rush over it all at once. It claims one hollow, then another. It fills the wheel ruts. It swallows the lower stones. It curls around the raised middle, black and glossy, reflecting brief sparks of light from the tower above. The keeper closes the shutter. "Islandow," he says. The words settle in the room. Islandow. Until the tide turns, no one comes in, no one leaves. The village may be less than a mile away, perhaps close enough to see from the tower in daylight, but tonight it might as well be across an ocean. You look at the door. It suddenly seems thinner. The walls seem thicker. The tower no longer feels like a post on the coast. It feels like something afloat, anchored in stone, surrounded by water and night. Coastal folklore sometimes warned children that the tide had a memory and came back for anyone who mocked it. in some villages. Older people told stories of careless travellers hearing voices behind them on tidal flats, only to turn and find the sea already covering their footprints. Sensible lessons hidden inside ghost stories. Really, medieval risker education was not always brutal, but it was memorable. The keeper moves calmly, he checks the door bar, then the lower latch, then the small storage chest. He places a second blanket near the hearth and nudges the sand bucket closer to the wall, away from any damp seeping under the threshold. These actions are not rushed. That steadiness helps. If you were frightened, you would have permission to be frightened. Since he is merely practical, you must also be practical. Very unfair, but there it is. You help him lift a bundle of spare wood onto stones near the hearth. Not too close to the flames, not far enough to remain wet. He checks the supply with a careful eye, counting in his head. Fuel for the beacon, fuel for the hearth, oil for the lamps, food until morning, water, rope, horn, knife, blankets. You begin to see how survival is a kind of inventory, not glorious, not poetic. Just knowing what you have, what you might need, and what the storm can take from you. The available records leave some uncertainty around how often medieval beacon towers were cut off by tides, storms, or flooded roads. Some stood permanently on headlands. Others occupied harbour entrances, tidal islands, reefs, or low promontories where access depended on local conditions. Specialists continue to interpret scattered references in charters, port accounts, and later coastal descriptions. Still, one thing is easy to imagine from inside this room once water surrounds the tower. Independence becomes less a romantic idea and more a cold fact. The keeper gestures for you to sit. You obey. Your legs are grateful. He sits opposite you near the wall, where he can see the door, the shutter, and the stair all at once. A person does not choose such a position by accident. Years in a place like this teach where to sit, where to stand, and which noises matter. The sea rises. You hear it now at the base of the tower, not constantly, in pulses. A slap of water against lower stone. A sucking retreat. A heavier strike when a larger wave runs farther up the rocks. Sometimes spray hits the shutter even here. Carried by the wind, it patters like thrown gravel, then drips down the outside board. The tower smells wetter. That seems impossible, but it is true. Damp pushes through cracks. The rushes near the door darken slightly. The keeper notices and lays down a piece of sacking to catch the water. You think of the causeway beneath the tide. Its stones are still there, hidden under black movement. Fish may already pass over it. Weed may drag across it. The footprints of villagers, carts, and keepers vanish beneath salt water, as if the day's ordinary life has been erased until morning. For some reason, that makes the tower feel quieter. The world has narrowed again. The keeper's room, the stair, the beacon, the sea, no road, no village path, no easy escape, and yet the room holds, the hearth burns, the lamp glows, the old wooden ship carving sits on the shelf, its tiny sail catching fire's light. You remember the keeper's father carving it, though of course you never knew him. You imagine another winter, another storm, another person sitting in almost this same room, listening to almost this same tide. The thought is oddly comforting. You are not the first to be shut in by water. You will not be the last. The keeper lifts his cup and takes a slow drink. Then he tilts his head toward the stair. For the next tide marks, he says. We check the light. Naturally, because the tower may be an island now. But the flame still has to be fed. Above you, the beacon burns into the storm. Below you, the tide takes the causeway completely, leaving only black water where the path once ran, and the room settles into the knowledge that until morning, the tower belongs to the sea. The sea owns the night now. You feel it in every stone beneath your feet. The tower remains standing exactly where it stood before. Yet something has changed. The vanished causeway has altered your sense of distance. The village is still there somewhere beyond darkness and water, but it has slipped beyond reach. The tower has become a world unto itself, floating not on waves but on isolation. The keeper finishes his drink and rises. No dramatic announcement. No speech about duty. He simply takes the lantern. That is how most necessary work begins. You stand and follow. The stair greets you once again. At this point you suspect the tower was secretly designed by someone who hated knees. Upward you go. The lantern throws amber light over wet stone. Your boots find familiar hollows in the steps. The air grows cooler as you climb, then warmer again as traces of smoke drift down from above. The beacon chamber awaits. When you enter, the flame still burns strongly. That should be reassuring. Instead, the keeper immediately begins inspecting everything. You have learned enough to understand why. Success in a storm is temporary. A flame that burns well now may struggle in an hour. A shutter that holds tonight may fail after the next gust. A latch that seems secure can loosen under constant vibration. Nothing receives permanent approval from the weather. The keeper moves from opening to opening, checking, listening, touching wood, iron, and stone. Then he stops. Here. You step closer. At first you see nothing. Then you notice a thin line of movement. Cold air. Not much. Just a narrow stream slipping through a crack beside one shutter frame. The wind has found a weakness. The opening is tiny, yet the effect becomes obvious once noticed. Each gust sends a sharper draft across the chamber. The nearby flame leans slightly whenever the air reaches it. The keeper frowns, not because the damage is severe, because damage rarely stays the same size. Documents from medieval ports often mention the constant burden of maintenance. Buildings near salt water age quickly, wood warped, iron rusted, mortar weakened, storms exploited every weakness they could find. Coastal communities spent enormous amounts of labour simply preserving what already existed. The keeper retrieves a bundle of cloth strips from a storage niche. You help hold the lantern while he examines the frame. The crack appears where wood and stone meet, not surprising. Different materials rarely age politely together. The keeper presses one strip into the gap, tests it, removes it, uses a thicker one, tests again. Better. Then another gust arrives. The shutter rattles. The draft returns. The keeper mutters something under his breath that sounds deeply uncomplimentary toward both weather and carpentry. You pretend not to hear. The repair continues. Cloth, pitch, wooden wedge, pressure, patience, none of it feels heroic. Yet somehow the work becomes absorbing. You focus entirely on small details. The texture of the cloth, the smell of pitch, the way the lantern light gleams on the damp wood, the rhythm of the keeper's hands. The storm fades into the background. For a while, then the tower lurches beneath a particularly powerful wave. Not truly lurches, but your body insists otherwise. The sensation runs upward through the structure. Stone vibrates. The shutters tremble. A few grains of mortar sprinkle onto the floor. You and the keeper exchange a glance. The tower settles, still standing. Good. An old coastal saying claimed that a tower which groaned during a storm was speaking to the sea. Nobody could agree on what it was saying. Some insisted it was a warning. Others believed it was a complaint. A few claimed the tower and the sea had been arguing for centuries, and neither side was willing to admit defeat. The keeper finishes the repair, for now. The draft weakens considerably. Not perfect, good enough. That phrase may be the true foundation of civilization. He tests the shutter bar next. One end feels loose. Again, not dangerous. Yet, you fetch tools, a mallet, wooden pegs, a short iron hook. The keeper adjusts the bar while you hold the lantern close. The chamber fills with sounds. Tap, scrape, tap, wind, fire, tap. The work creates a strange comfort. Action always feels better than waiting. Outside, unseen waves continue attacking the coastline. Inside, you improve a latch by half an inch. History often progresses this way. Small victories, repeated endlessly. A surviving account from one medieval harbour describes storms damaging warehouses, piers, boats, and storage buildings over successive winters. What stands out is not the destruction itself, but the persistence afterward. Communities rebuilt, repaired, reinforced, then repeated the process again the following year. Coastal life required resilience because retreat was rarely an option. The repair completed, the keeper finally allows himself a moment near the viewing gap. He opens the shutter carefully. Cold air pours inside. You join him. The sight beyond remains astonishing. The sea seems larger at night. The darkness removes scale. A single breaking wave becomes a moving cliff. Spray rises like drifting snow. The horizon has vanished entirely. Sky and water blend together into one enormous black landscape. The beacon's glow stretches outward in fragments. It illuminates spray, highlights foam, then disappears. The light reaches farther than your eyes can follow. The ship seen earlier remains absent. Perhaps it found shelter. Perhaps it sailed onward. Perhaps it simply vanished beyond the weather. The uncertainty lingers. The documentary trail surrounding many medieval maritime incidents is frustratingly incomplete. Wrecks occurred. Storms struck. Crews disappeared. Yet countless small events left little record behind. Historians sometimes know a vessel was lost because taxes vanished from an account book, or because a widow later appeared in legal records. Entire human dramas can survive only as faint shadows in administrative documents. The keeper closes the shutter. The chamber immediately feels warmer. You realise how precious small comforts become during winter. A blocked draught, a secure latch, a dry blanket, an extra candle, a cup of ale. None seem remarkable until conditions worsen. Then they become treasures. The keeper examines the beacon again, satisfied. For the moment, he gestures toward the stair. Back down. The descent feels easier than earlier climbs. Fatigue remains, yet familiarity helps. The stair no longer feels foreign. You know its turns, its sounds, its smells, even its flaws. When you reach the keeper's room, the hearth still burns steadily. The room appears inviting in a way it never did before. The blanket, the stool, the carved ship, the hanging rope, even the suspicious mattress seems almost friendly. Outside, another blast of wind circles the tower. The shutters hold. The repaired gap remains sealed. The door does not shake. The room survives the test. The keeper notices. A slight nod. Approval again. The highest form of praise available in this establishment. You sit near the fire. The warmth reaches your hands. The storm continues beyond the walls. The sea continues climbing and falling. The beacon continues burning above. Yet for a little while, the tower feels stronger than it did an hour ago. Not because the storm has weakened, because you have answered it with cloth, with wedges, with patience, with stubbornness. The oldest tools in human history. And as the fire glows across the curved stone walls, the lighthouse keeper's room settles once more into its long winter watch, holding back wind and darkness, one careful repair at a time. The night stretches onward. Time behaves strangely inside the tower. Without a visible horizon, without moonlight, without familiar village sounds, the hours lose their sharp edges. The storm erases ordinary measurements. You stop thinking in terms of clocks and begin thinking in terms of tasks. The beacon has been checked, the shutters repaired, the hearth fed, the tide has risen, the bell has faded. Those become your markers. The keeper seems entirely comfortable with this arrangement. He sits near the fire, mending a length of rope with patient fingers. The thick cord rests across his lap. Every few moments he twists a strand, tightens a knot, or trims a loose fibre. The work appears almost meditative. You watch the flames watch the wood. The storm watches everyone. For a little while, nothing happens. Then the keeper freezes. Only for an instant, a tiny pause, barely noticeable, yet after hours beside him, you have learned to trust such pauses. He lifts his head, listens. The fire crackles. The wind presses against stone. The sea booms below. Then comes another sound, a dull thump, far away. Not from the tower, not from the room. From outside, you sit upright. The keeper rises immediately. No words. Both of you move toward the shutter. He opens it carefully. Cold air floods the room. The storm rushes in. For several heartbeats you see nothing but darkness and flying spray. Then the beacon above sweeps enough light across the water to reveal movement. A shape. Not imagined this time. Not a trick of surf or snow. A vessel, far offshore, yet unmistakably present. The sight holds your attention at once. The ship appears small against the vast sea. Even at this distance you can sense the struggle. It rises on dark swells and drops into troughs. Occasionally a pale scrap of sail catches the light before vanishing again. The keeper narrows his eyes. You do the same. The vessel is moving, slowly, painfully, but moving. A detail found repeatedly in medieval maritime records is that coastal voyages often stayed within sight of land whenever possible. Sailors relied heavily on familiar landmarks, local knowledge, and visual navigation. Open ocean travel certainly existed, but nearshore routes remained vital for trade, fishing, communication, and transport. During storms, however, even experienced crews could find themselves dangerously close to reefs, shoals, and rocky coastlines. The ship rises again. For one brief moment the beacon catches its side. You glimpse the outline of a mast, perhaps two. Then darkness swallows it. The keeper closes the shutter halfway, leaving only a narrow opening, enough to observe, not enough to let the room freeze. Together you stand watching. The experience feels strangely intimate. You do not know who is aboard. You never will. Yet the distance between your lives has narrowed. The people on that vessel are depending on lights they cannot touch and strangers they will never meet. And here you are, standing beside one of those strangers. The keeper reaches for the brass horn. The familiar instrument feels heavier tonight. Perhaps because now there is someone to hear it. He raises it, blows. The note rolls across the sea, deep, steady, strong. The sound disappears into darkness. You wait. The ship rises, falls, rises again. No answer is only wind. The keeper tries again. Another note, longer this time, then silence. You begin to wonder if the crew can hear anything at all through the storm. An old mariner's saying claimed that storms steal sound from men and return it to the sea. Sailors used the phrase when voices failed to carry through heavy weather. Whether anyone truly believed the sea collector's sounds is difficult to say, but after listening to this gale, the idea feels surprisingly reasonable. The keeper lowers the horn. Neither of you speaks. The vessel remains visible intermittently. Sometimes only the mast appears, sometimes only a pale shape where the hull might be, sometimes nothing at all. Then suddenly the ship emerges again, startlingly close compared to earlier glimpses. Not close enough to identify, but close enough to matter. You feel your stomach tighten. The sea between the tower and the vessel seems crowded with invisible dangers. Reefs, sandbars, hidden rocks, currents. The keeper studies the water carefully. His expression grows more focused. You realize he's not watching the ship itself. He's watching where the ship is heading. A surviving coastal chart from a later century shows how many dangerous features were known primarily through local experience rather than precise measurement. Generations of fishermen, pilots, and harbour workers memorised submerged hazards that might never appear clearly on formal maps. In places like this, knowledge lived in people's heads long before it lived on paper. The keeper suddenly moves, not toward the shutter, toward the stair. You follow immediately, upward. The lantern chamber, the beacon. You understand before he explains. The light must be brighter, not because it has weakened, so because the ship needs every advantage available. The climb feels faster this time. Urgency shortens distances. When you enter the upper chamber, the fire burns steadily. The lamps glow well. Yet the keeper begins making adjustments. Fuel, oil, wick, airflow. Small improvements, nothing dramatic, everything important. You help without being asked. The rhythm has become familiar now. You know where the tools hang. You know where the spare wicks are stored. You know how to hold the lantern without blinding the keeper. The tower has quietly taught you its routines. Outside, the vessel appears again, a darker silhouette beyond the spray. The beacon flares slightly brighter as fresh fuel catches. Orange light reflects from drifting snow. The keeper opens a viewing gap. Cold rushes in. Together you watch. The ship seems to hesitate. Perhaps it turns. Perhaps the sea turns it. The distinction is difficult to make. Researchers continue examining how effective smaller medieval beacons were under severe weather conditions. Visibility depended on fuel quality, elevation, atmospheric conditions, and the design of the light itself. The surviving evidence suggests that even modest beacons could provide meaningful guidance, though certainly not the precision of later lighthouse systems. The keeper sounds the horn again. This time the answer comes, not a bell, a light, tiny, faint, almost invisible, yet unmistakable. For one heartbeat, far beyond the surf, a lantern flashes, then disappears. You stare. The keeper sees it too. Neither of you moves. The lantern appears again, brief, weak, but real. A signal. Human beings reaching through darkness. The feeling is unexpectedly powerful. You have spent hours surrounded by wind, stone, and sea. The tower often feels alone at the edge of the world. Yet there, beyond the storm, another group of people stands awake beneath the same weather. Cold, tired, determined, alive. The keeper smiles, a rare event. His face changes completely, not dramatically, just enough. The smile lasts only a moment before work reclaims him. More fuel, another check, another glance through the gap. The vessel remains distant, still struggling, still moving. But now you know it sees the beacon, and the beacon sees it. Outside, winter continues its assault. Inside, the flame burns brighter than before. The chamber fills with warmth, smoke, and purpose. The ship drifts across the edge of visibility once more. A lantern flashes, then vanishes. You do not know whether the crew will reach safety. Neither does the keeper. The night offers no guarantees. Yet for now, amid snow, darkness, and black water, a passing ship and a lonely lighthouse have found one another. Sometimes that is the most anyone can ask from a storm. The tiny answering light from the ship appears twice more. Each time it is weaker. Not because the crew has given up, you hope, but because snow thickens between you and the water. The storm folds itself into layers. One moment the sea opens enough to reveal a pale flicker far beyond the rocks. The next moment everything disappears behind a wall of white. The keeper watches until even patience has nothing left to hold. Then he closes the viewing gap. The lantern chamber suddenly feels smaller. The beacon burns behind you, strong and smoky, filling the space with warmth that never quite becomes comfort. Your face feels hot. Your back feels cold. Your hands smell of oil and soot. A fine layer of salt has dried at your lips. The keeper sets the horn down. He does it carefully, almost respectfully. as if the object has spoken enough for one night. For several minutes, neither of you moves. The ship is out there somewhere. The tower is here. Between the two lies weather, water, and faith in small signals. At last the keeper reaches into his tunic and draws out a little cord. Something hangs from it, dark against his palm. You lean closer and see a small metal badge, worn nearly smooth, a saint, perhaps, a pilgrim token. The face is almost gone from years of handling. He presses it once between his fingers, then tucks it away. No speech follows, no sermon, just the gesture. You understand more from that than from any explanation. People who lived by the sea learned to trust what they could touch, mend, carry, and count: rope, oil, fuel, tide marks, stars when clouds allowed them. But they also lived beside a force that could erase all careful planning in an hour, so they carried prayers too, not always loudly, not always neatly, sometimes in badges, scraps of wax, whispered names, old songs, or a sign made before climbing a stair. You follow him down. The stair curves beneath your boots, and the flame of the horn lantern throws your shadows against the wet stone. Halfway down, the keeper pauses beside one of the narrow slits. Through it, you hear the sea and catch a glimpse of black water shining where the causeway used to be. He touches the stone beside the opening. There are marks cut into it, not decoration, simple scratches, some longer than others, one placed above a small carved cross. You raise the lantern. The keeper looks at the marks and says quietly, "Highest tide I saw." You count them. Years of storms held in little lines. One from a winter before your time here, another higher, another lower, one perhaps carved by his father. The tower remembers through stone because a paper would rot and stories would change. Medieval coastal people often read their landscape through marks like these: a notch on a rock, a tree bent by the prevailing wind, a church tower aligned with a headland, a reef visible only at low tide, a safe channel known by the colour of the water. Navigation was not merely a matter of direction, it was memory attached to place. You continue downward. The keeper's room receives you again with firelight and the smell of supper was cooling in bowls. The air here feels softer after the upper chamber. Less smoke, less overwind, more human. The keeper places the lantern on the table and kneels by the hearth. He takes a thin stick from beside the fire and draws lines in a patch of ash near the edge of the hearthstone. A rough map appears: the tower, the causeway, the outer rocks, a deeper channel, a sandbank that shifts, a place he marks with a small tap of the stick. Bad water. You look at it. Bad water seems a modest phrase for the place you imagine. He adds another mark farther out. Good if they turn there. The ship. He is showing you where it may be, where it should go, where it must not go. The ash map is fragile. One careless sleeve would ruin it. Yet for this moment, it holds the whole coast. You crouch beside him. The keeper taps the tower mark. Light here. Then the channel. Sea mark there. He points toward the shutter, beyond which nothing is visible. By day, they use the white cliff. By night, us. The simplicity settles over you. During daylight, a pale cliff might guide a pilot. At night, a flame. In clearer weather, a church tower inland. In fog, perhaps a bell. In storm, whatever can still be seen or heard. The coast is not one signal. It is a language. The keeper draws a small circle near the rock line. You ask what it means. He hesitates. Then says, "Old stone." Apparently a standing stone or ancient marker sits there somewhere above the tide, nearly hidden from the landward side but visible from certain angles at sea. Fishermen know it. Pilots know it. Children probably dare one another to touch it during low tide and then run back before the water rises, because children in every century are committed to making adults tired. Some villagers say the stone was placed by giants. The keeper says this without expression. You wait, he adds. It was not. A little later, he admits nobody actually knows who placed it. That feels more honest. The truth may be older than the tower, older than the village, older than the church bell you heard in the distance before the storm swallowed it. Coastlines gather human traces the way beaches gather shells. A pagan stone becomes a sea mark. A saint's chapel becomes a landmark. A beacon becomes a warning becomes a story. Near the hearth, the hag stone still hangs from its cord. It turns faintly in a draught. You remember noticing it earlier. The keeper follows your gaze and gives a small shrug. My mother hung one by every door. To keep out storms. He snorts. If it worked, she would have been a bishop. You almost laugh, but the wind chooses that moment to strike the tower hard enough that the shutter jumps. The hag stone swings more violently. The keeper watches it. Then, very quietly, he reaches out and stills it with one finger. Practical belief and superstition sit close together here. A person may know perfectly well that a hold stone cannot stop weather, yet still feel better when it hangs by the door. Modern people are not so different. We check locks twice, we keep lucky coins, we trust routines. We pretend our little rituals are more rational because they involve calendars and passwords instead of sea stones. The keeper returns to the ash map. He wipes part of it clean and redraws the outer rocks. There are gaps in his certainty. You can see them. A shifting bank, a submerged ledge known only in calmer tides, a current that behaves differently after heavy rain inland. Much about medieval coastal navigation was never written down in a way that survived. It lived in skilled memory, in voices, in warnings shouted across docks, in fathers teaching sons, in widows remembering where a boat did not return. Later scholars can reconstruct some of it from records, wreck sites, harbour plans, and local names, but the lived knowledge itself often vanished with the people who carried it. The keeper leans back. The ash map glows faintly red at its edges from the hearth. For a moment it looks like the coast seen from above, with fire hidden under the land. Outside, the sea roars over the drowned causeway. Above, the beacon continues burning. Beyond the rocks, perhaps. The ship follows whatever marks its crew can read. A light, a horn, a memory of a white cliff, a prayer said through clenched teeth, a guess. You sit back on your heels and listen to the storm. It no longer sounds like pure chaos, it contains signals now. The boom of waves against outer rocks, the hiss of water over lower stone, the shifting pitch of wind around the tower. The faint clink of tools above when a gust travels through the lantern chamber. The coast is speaking in harsh syllables, and the keeper, half asleep or not, understands more of them than you do. He stands slowly, joints stiff from crouching. Then he wipes the ash map away with his boot. The coast disappears. The lesson remains. He looks toward the stair. You already know. Soon you climb again. Soon the flame needs tending. Soon the night asks for another answer. But for a few breaths, you stay beside the hearth, with prayers, omens, sea marks, and old stone memories gathered quietly around you, while the winter storm continues to search the coast for anyone careless enough to stop listening. The stair can wait, for now. The keeper seems to reach the same conclusion. He lowers himself onto the edge of the bed and stretches his shoulders carefully. A faint crack sounds from somewhere in his back. The expression that follows suggests satisfaction rather than concern. You cannot blame him. The tower has demanded attention for hours. Even storms eventually allow brief pauses. The fire settles lower in the hearth. Its glow becomes softer, richer, painting amber shapes across the curved stone walls. The carved ship on the shelf catches the light. The hanging hag stone turns lazily in a draught that survives somewhere within the room. The atmosphere changes, not quieter exactly. The storm still exists. The sea still hammers the rocks. The beacon still burns above. Yet something inside the tower slows. The work pauses. Fatigue arrives. You feel it first in your legs, then your shoulders, then behind your eyes. The warmth from the hearth becomes increasingly persuasive. The bed, which earlier resembled a medieval punishment device, begins acquiring unexpected charm. This is how exhaustion tricks people. The keeper notices your stare. It gets better after midnight. You look at the mattress, then at him. He smiles slightly. The bed doesn't. Fair enough. You remove your outer cloak and drape it near the hearth. The wool releases traces of smoke and damp sea air as it dries. Your boots remain on. Anyone who has spent time in a cold stone building understands why. Warm feet are precious, cold floors are patient enemies. The keeper pulls an extra blanket from a chest. The fabric is rough but thick. You shake it once. Dust motes drift through the firelight, then settle. For a few minutes neither of you speaks. The tower provides enough conversation on its own. Wind presses against the shutters. Water strikes stone below. Occasionally a distant creak travels through the structure. Not alarming, just the ordinary sounds of a building negotiating with weather. In many medieval coastal towers, living quarters remained remarkably simple. Comfort came second to function. Space was expensive. Fuel was valuable. Every item had to justify its presence. Beds were often narrow, storage limited, and privacy almost non-existent. People adapted because they had little choice. The modern expectation of personal space would have seemed luxurious to many inhabitants of such places. You sit on the edge of the mattress. The straw shifts beneath you, loudly. The sound resembles several chickens attempting to escape a basket. The keeper laughs, an actual laugh, rare enough to qualify as a local festival. You'll learn. Apparently the bed has techniques. You're not entirely sure you wish to study them. Eventually you stretch out. Carefully, the mattress settles. The straw rearranges itself beneath your weight. It is not comfortable, yet it is not impossible. And after enough climbing, carrying, watching, and washing, even mediocre bedding becomes attractive. The blanket goes over you. Warmth gathers slowly. Your body begins releasing tension you had not realized it was holding. The firelight flickers across the ceiling. The room feels smaller from this angle. Safer too, like a cave carved into the tower. A shelter within a shelter, outside the walls. Winter continues raging. Inside, human beings have made a pocket of warmth. An old tale from one fishing village claimed that storms grew curious at night and pressed their faces against windows, hoping to glimpse the people sheltering inside. According to the story, anyone foolish enough to stare back for too long would dream of waves until dawn. Whether the story was intended as a warning against cold drafts or overactive imaginations remains uncertain. Either way, it encouraged children to stay away from rattling shutters. You find yourself listening differently now. Lying down changes sound. The tower seems larger. The wind seems farther away. The sea becomes deeper. The rhythm of the waves emerges more clearly. Crash, retreat, crash, retreat, an endless breathing. The keeper remains awake, at least for now. He sits near the hearth, repairing a leather strap by firelight. The needle moves slowly through the material, back and forth, back and forth. The sight is oddly reassuring. Someone remains alert, someone knows what they're doing. You close your eyes briefly, not sleeping, just resting. The darkness behind your eyelids fills with images from the night. The distant ship, the beacon flame, the drowned causeway, the ash map, the standing stone somewhere beyond sight, the bell heard through snow, all of it drifts together. You open your eyes again. The keeper glances over. Sleep if you can. An admirable suggestion. The difficulty lies in convincing the storm. You pull the blanket higher. The wool scratches slightly against your chin. The hearth gives off steady warmth. Gradually your breathing slows. Then a sound interrupts everything. Not loud, not violent, different. A knock. 3 quick impacts. You sit upright immediately. The keeper is already standing. Silence follows. Both of you listen. Nothing. Only wind. Perhaps imagination. Perhaps shifting wood. Then it comes again. Knock, knock, knock. This time from above. Not the door, not the shutter. The lantern chamber. The keeper relaxes slightly. You do not. He notices. The loose chain. Of course. Apparently you have spent enough hours in the tower to become alarmed by perfectly ordinary noises, but not enough hours to identify them correctly. The keeper returns to his chair. You settle back down. Your heartbeat gradually slows. Life in isolated places seems to require a catalogue of sounds. Each creak, whistle, grape and rattle eventually earns a name. Experienced inhabitants learn which noises deserve attention and which merely accompany the weather. Archaeologists studying medieval coastal sites often discover evidence of continual adaptation. Repairs layered upon repairs, modified doorways, reinforced walls, replaced beams. Communities responded constantly to changing conditions. Buildings evolved because survival demanded flexibility. A tower that remained unchanged rarely remained standing for long. The fire burns lower. The keeper finally sets aside the leather strap. For the first time all night, he appears tired, not dramatically, just human. He rubs one hand across his eyes, then stands, checks the hearth, checks the lamp, checks the stair, checks the shutter. Routine. Again. Always again. Only after completing the circuit does he move toward his own sleeping place. A pallet near the wall. Simple. Practical. You'd almost forgotten he needed rest as well. The blanket rustles. The room grows quieter. The fire settles deeper into glowing coals. For several minutes the only sound is the weather. You stare at the ceiling. Sleep hovers nearby but refuses commitment. The storm has filled your thoughts with too many moving pieces. What became of the ship? Has the tide reached its highest point? Is the beacon still burning strongly? Will morning bring calmer seas? The question drift through your mind. No answers arrive. Beyond the shutter. Darkness remains absolute. The causeway lies hidden beneath black water. The rocks wait beneath the waves. The beacon shines above. And here, within thick stone walls, you lie beneath rough blankets while winter prowls the coast. Gradually the room grows warmer. Not because the fire strengthens, because your body relaxes. The mattress becomes more tolerable. The blanket feels heavier. Your eyelids lower. The keeper's breathing steadies across the room. For the first time since arriving at the tower, both of you are almost asleep, almost. Because somewhere above, beyond the stair, the beacon continues its lonely work, and before long, the flame will ask for attention again. Sleep arrives, then immediately betrays you. One moment you are drifting in that strange space between waking and dreaming, wrapped in coarse blankets while the storm murmurs beyond the walls. The next moment a hand grips your shoulder, not roughly, firmly. Your eyes open, the room is darker. The fire has collapsed into a bed of glowing coals. The shadows are deeper, the air feels cooler. For several confused seconds you have no idea where you are or yet. Then the smell of salt and smoke returns. The curved stone wall appears beside you. The hanging hagstone turns slowly in the dim light. The tower comes back. The keeper crouches beside the bed. The lamp, nothing more. He does not need to explain. You hear it immediately, or rather, you hear what is missing. The steady crackle from above has weakened. The familiar sounds of the beacon chamber seem quieter. Your sleep vanishes at once. You sit up. The room feels different during the middle hours of the night. Earlier there had been activity, conversation, repairs, and watchfulness. Now everything seems suspended. Even the storm sounds older somehow, as though it has been raging for centuries and intends to continue for centuries more. The keeper already has the horn lantern lit. Its small flame throws soft amber circles across the room. You swing your feet onto the floor. The rushes feel cold. Your joints protest. Apparently climbing lighthouse stairs repeatedly is not considered restful by the human body. The keeper hands you the lantern. You rise. Outside, the sea continues breathing around the tower. Inside, two sleepy people prepare to rescue a flame before darkness gains ground. Many medieval beacons depended entirely upon regular human attention. No clockwork system existed to refill fuel or trim wicks automatically. A keeper's sleep was often interrupted throughout the night by inspections, adjustment, and maintenance. In bad weather, these checks became even more frequent. A neglected flame could weaken quickly, especially when fuel quality varied from one shipment to the next. The stair seems narrower than before, perhaps because you are tired, perhaps because night has deepened. The lantern light reaches only a few steps ahead. Beyond that, the spiral vanishes into darkness. The stone feels colder beneath your fingertips. Moisture glistens along the wall. The climb begins again. Step, turn, step, turn. The rhythm has become familiar enough that you no longer count the stairs. Your body simply follows the curve upward. Halfway to the lantern chamber, a sudden gust whistles through one of the wall slits. The sound resembles a distant voice. You pause instinctively. The keeper does not. He keeps climbing. Experience has taught him which noises deserve concern. You continue after him. The lantern chamber door opens. Smoke drifts outward. Not thick smoke, just enough to signal trouble. Inside, the problem becomes clear. One lamp has nearly gone out. Its wick has curled unevenly. The oil level has dropped lower than expected. The main beacon still burns, but less strongly than before. Shadows gather in corners where bright light had stood earlier. The room feels tired. Even the flame seems exhausted. The keeper sets to work immediately. You place the lantern where its glow supplements the fading light. The chamber fills with small movements. Oil poured carefully. Wicks trimmed. Ash removed. Fuel adjusted. The sort of tasks that appear insignificant until they stop happening. A weather-worn tradition from several coastal regions held that fires possessed moods. A lazy flame, a hungry flame, a stubborn flame. People spoke of them almost as companions. The idea sounds quaint today, yet after spending hours tending the same beacon, you understand the impulse. The fire does seem to have a personality. It responds differently each time the weather changes. The keeper pinches away a blackened section of wick. The lamp immediately brightens. A small victory, then another adjustment, another improvement. Soon the chamber begins recovering. The orange glow strengthens. Shadows retreat. The warmth increases. You find yourself staring into the beacon. The flames twist and fold around one another. Gold, orange, white, tiny sparks drift upward. There is something hypnotic about watching a fire at night. Perhaps that is why people have gathered around flames for thousands of years. The movement occupies just enough attention to quiet other thoughts. For a moment, you forget the storm. Then a violent burst of wind rattles the shutters and reminds everyone who remains in charge. The keeper glances toward the nearest opening. You follow his gaze. A faint line of smoke moves sideways. The wind has shifted. Again, every change requires compensation. He adjusts the airflow. The fire responds. The relationship feels almost conversational. The documentary evidence from medieval coastal stations rarely describes these small nightly routines in detail. Records tend to focus on repairs, expenses, supplies, and major events. Yet behind every surviving document stood countless ordinary actions. Someone carried oil, someone swept ash, someone repaired shutters, someone climbed stairs in the middle of the night because a flame looked weak. History often preserves the results while forgetting the labour. The beacon grows stronger. The keeper finally relaxes slightly. Not completely. That would be irresponsible, but enough. You move toward one of the viewing gaps. The shutter opens a fraction. Cold air enters. The sight beyond stops you immediately. Nothing. There is simply nothing. No horizon. No ship. No stars. No distinction between sky and sea. And the mist have erased the world. The darkness appears solid. As though the coast itself has vanished, only the nearest spray becomes visible when illuminated by the beacon. White fragments flash briefly, then disappear again. The sensation is unsettling. If you did not know the sea lay beyond the tower, you might believe the world ended a few yards from the wall. The keeper joins you. He studies the darkness, then closes the shutter. No ship. His voice contains neither relief nor disappointment. Merely observation. The vessel from earlier has gone. Whether towards safety or deeper trouble remains unknown. Some questions receive answers, others simply drift away with the tide. The keeper returns to the beacon, satisfied now. He wipes soot from his hands using a cloth that surrendered any hope of cleanliness years ago. You stand near the warmth. The middle of the night settles around you. The storm continues. The flame survives. The tower endures. There is comfort in repetition. Climb, check, repair, descend, rest, repeat. The routine becomes its own shelter. Eventually the keeper lifts the lantern again. Time to go back down. The stair awaits. You descend carefully. The tower creaks softly around you. Water booms against lower rocks. Somewhere far below, the hearth still glows. When you enter the keeper's room, the remaining embers cast a faint red light across the walls. The room feels smaller than before, but warmer in spirit. The keeper kneels beside the hearth. A few pieces of wood, a careful breath, a little patience. Soon small flames emerge once more. The fire returns, not dramatically, quietly, like an old friend waking from sleep. You settle back onto the mattress. The blanket covers you again. The keeper returns to his pallet. Neither of you speaks. Words seem unnecessary. Above, the beacon shines more brightly now. Outside, the sea continues searching the coast. Inside, smoke curls gently toward the ceiling while warmth slowly spreads through the room. The crisis, if it can even be called that, has passed. A wick trimmed, a lamp restored, a flame saved from fading. History is often imagined as great battles and famous rulers. Tonight it feels more like keeping a light alive while everyone else sleeps. Your eyes grow heavy once more. The storm becomes distant. The mattress becomes softer. The room settles around you. And somewhere high above the sleeping tower, the beacon burns steadily into the winter darkness, refusing to surrender even a single hour of the night. You wake slowly, not because the night has ended, because your body has decided that enough sleep has happened, whether you agree or not. For several moments you remain beneath the blanket, listening. The first thing you notice is that the storm sounds different. It is still there, very much there, yet something has changed. The sharp hammering gusts that rattled the tower earlier have weakened. In their place comes a softer, heavier sound. Wind still circles the stone walls, but now it drifts and sighs instead of striking like a thrown spear. The sea continues its endless work below. Crash, retreat, crash, retreat. The rhythm remains. The tone has shifted. You open your eyes. The room is grey, not bright, not dark. Grey. a colour that belongs neither to night nor day. The hearth contains only a few glowing embers. The keeper is already awake, sitting on the stool near the shutter. His silhouette appears motionless except for the occasional movement of his hands around a cup. He notices you stirring. "Morning." The word feels optimistic. You glance toward the shutter. The room certainly does not look like morning. The keeper seems to understand your skepticism. Probably. Fair enough. You sit up. The blanket falls away. The cold finds you immediately, pleased to renew your acquaintance. The room smells different than it did during the night. Less smoke, more damp stone, more sea air. The scent of extinguished embers lingers near the hearth. You rise and stretch carefully. Every climb up the spiral stair has left its signature somewhere in your body. The keeper offers a cup, warm, not hot, but welcome. You wrap your hands around it and move toward the shutter. The keeper lifts the latch. The opening widens. At once the outside world reveals itself, or rather, refuses to. Snow, mist, grey. That is all. The horizon has vanished. The Asian sky blend together so completely that distinguishing one from the other becomes impossible. Even the rocks below appear only when waves strike them, revealing brief flashes of white foam. The beacon above still burns, though its glow now seems faint against the spreading daylight. Or what passes for daylight. You stare into the whiteness. The world feels unfinished, as if someone sketched the coast and forgot to add the details. The keeper sips from his cup. Bad visibility, an understatement worthy of preservation in a museum. Along many medieval coastlines, winter mornings often presented challenges as dangerous as nighttime. Fog, sea mist, snowfall, and low cloud could obscure landmarks entirely. Mariners sometimes found daylight less useful than expected when weather erased familiar reference points. A white cliff, a church tower, or a harbour entrance could disappear even after sunrise. The keeper closes the shutter again. Not fully, just enough. The room brightens slightly. A soft grey light spreads across the walls. It reveals details hidden during the night. The grain of the wooden chest, the repaired crack near the doorway, the worn surface of the stool, the old ship carving. Everything appears gentler now. Less dramatic, more real. The keeper kneels beside the hearth. Soon small flames begin returning to life. The process is familiar by now. Embers, dry kindling, patience, breath, a little flame, then another. You watch the transformation. There is something satisfying about witnessing fire return from near extinction. It feels less like creating something new, and more like persuading something old to stay. The keeper adds a few pieces of wood. The room slowly warms. Outside, a gull cries. The sound surprises both of you. It arrives faintly through the mist. Then again, a reminder that the world beyond the tower still exists. The keeper smiles. Birds. You nod. Apparently that qualifies as news this morning. A weathered saying from some fishing communities held that gulls knew more about storms than priests, merchants, and nobles combined. Considering the number of sailors who watched bird behaviour before deciding whether to leave harbour, the birds may have appreciated the compliment. The keeper opens the cupboard and retrieves food. Breakfast appears remarkably similar to supper: bread, cheese, ale, a little dried fish. History occasionally lacked culinary creativity. You eat without complaint. Hunger remains an excellent seasoning. The grey light strengthens, not by much. Enough. The room becomes clearer. The keeper examines several oil containers while eating. One appears nearly empty. He turns it upside down and watches the last thick drops gather near the mouth. Need more next week. You look toward the drowned causeway beyond the wall. He follows your gaze. If the weather agrees, there it is again. The quiet reality of coastal life. Everything depends on arrival. Fuel arrives, food arrives, news arrives. Sometimes weather prevents all three. A person living inland might measure distance in miles. A person living here measures distance in conditions. The keeper finishes his meal. Then he moves toward a small shelf you have not examined closely before. Several objects rest there. A smooth shell, a rusted hook, a fragment of coloured glass, a carved bone needle. Each item appears insignificant. Together they resemble a collection assembled slowly over decades. You pick up the glass, blue, worn smooth by water. The keeper shrugs. From a wreck, you place it back carefully. No further explanation follows. Perhaps he does not know the ship's story. Perhaps he does. Either way, the fragment remains, a tiny survivor of a much larger event. The surviving evidence for countless small coastal wrecks is frustratingly sparse. Ships disappeared, cargoes vanished, storms erased traces, sometimes only scattered objects remained. A piece of pottery, a coin, a timber exposed after a storm. Archaeologists occasionally reconstruct remarkable stories from such fragments, but many vessels left little behind beyond rumour and memory. The room grows brighter still, yet the outside world remains hidden. The mist refuses to lift. You find yourself imagining the ship from last night somewhere beyond that pale curtain. Safe, perhaps, or anchored, or already far away. The uncertainty lingers. The keeper seems unconcerned. He has spent too many years beside the sea to demand immediate answers. Instead, he prepares for another climb. Not because anything appears wrong, because the beacon still requires attention. Routine again. Always routine. You help gather supplies, fresh oil, a cloth, replacement wick, the familiar tools. The tower feels different during morning. Less mysterious, more practical. The same stone, the same stair, the same work. Only the light has changed. Before leaving, the keeper pauses beside the hanging hagstone. He touches it lightly, not dramatically, not even consciously, perhaps just habit. Then he reaches for the lantern. You follow. The stair waits. The beacon waits. Outside, dawn remains trapped behind snow and sea mist. Inside, two figures begin another climb into the tower, carrying light toward a horizon that refuses to appear. The spiral stair feels almost friendly now. Almost. You still would not choose to spend your free time climbing it. But familiarity has softened your opinion. Your boots know where the worn hollows lie. Your shoulder automatically leans away from the dampest part of the wall. Your hand finds the smoother stones without looking. The tower has become readable, not comfortable. Readable? The keeper climbs ahead carrying a small oil vessel. You follow with the lantern. Morning, if it can still be called that, seeps through the narrow slits in the wall. The light is pale and uncertain. Rather than illuminating the stair, it merely turns the darkness grey. When you enter the beacon chamber, the change from night becomes immediately obvious. The flame still burns, but its authority has weakened. Hours ago it was the brightest thing in the world. Now it competes with daylight, weak daylight, reluctant daylight, yet daylight nonetheless. The keeper adjusts the lamps and checks the fuel supply. His movements are slower this morning, not sluggish, just measured. The urgency of the night has passed. Outside, the mist continues its occupation of the coastline. You move toward one of the viewing gaps. The shutter opens. Cold air enters. The world beyond remains hidden beneath drifting curtains of grey. But something has changed. There is movement. Not on the sea, on land. At first you mistake it for blowing snow. Then the shapes appear again. Dark figures, several of them. The keeper notices immediately. He opens the shutter wider. Together you peer through the gap. There, far beyond the drowned causeway, tiny silhouettes move across the pale landscape. 3, no, 4, perhaps 5. The distance makes counting difficult. They advance slowly through patches of snow and mist. Villagers. The realization feels oddly exciting. After so many hours spent isolated within the tower, the sight of other human beings seems almost miraculous. The keeper nods. Supply day. Apparently the storm has not entirely defeated civilization. You continue watching. The figures disappear, then reappear. Mist swallows them repeatedly, each time they emerge slightly closer. One appears to carry a pole across his shoulders. Another leads what might be a donkey. A third pulls something low to the ground, perhaps a sled. The scene unfolds with dreamlike slowness. Nothing in the Middle Ages ever seems rushed, except plagues. Those were unfortunately very efficient. The keeper closes the shutter and returns to the lamps. They'll wait! You blink. Wait where? The answer arrives a moment later. The causeway, or rather, what remains of it. The tide still covers much of the route. No matter how determined the villagers may be, water retains certain negotiating advantages. Along many medieval coasts, daily schedules often revolved around tides as much as sunlight. Markets, fishing trips, transport of goods, and even social visits sometimes depended on the sea's timetable. People learned patience because impatience could leave them stranded, soaked, or significantly less alive than intended. You descend with the keeper, back into the room. The hearth burns brighter now. The grey daylight entering through the shutter gives the chamber an entirely different personality. What seemed mysterious during the night now appears practical. The keeper begins preparing for visitors. Not dramatically. He sweeps a few rushes aside, straightens a stool, checks supplies, places a fresh piece of wood on the fire. The actions seem automatic. Hospitality in a remote place follows simple rules. Warmth, food if available, dry space, the rest can wait. You help tidy the room. The process takes surprisingly little time because there is not much to organize. The tower owns very few possessions. Outside, the sea continues booming against the rocks. The sound has become part of everything. You barely notice it until it stops. And it never stops. The keeper eventually opens the shutter again. The figures are closer now, distinct enough to identify. 4 villagers, 1 donkey, several bundles, 1 walking staff, and, judging by the way the smallest figure waves both arms enthusiastically, at least one person very pleased to have reached this point. The keeper grunts, "Alden's boy!" You have no idea who Alden is. Apparently the keeper does. The wave continues. The keeper does not wave back. After a long pause, he lifts 2 fingers briefly. This appears to satisfy everyone involved. A coastal saying sometimes repeated among fishing families claimed that a person who waved too enthusiastically at sea would invite another storm. No one seemed entirely certain why. Like many old sayings, it may have existed mainly to justify the naturally reserved behaviour of people who spent most of their lives cold and tired. The villagers stop near the edge of the water, waiting. The tide remains too high. From the tower you can just make out their movements. One sits on a bundle. Another adjusts something on the donkey. The boy continues looking toward the lighthouse. The keeper shakes his head. You'd think he'd never seen a tower. Perhaps he simply enjoys not being trapped inside one. The morning passes slowly. You repair a loose cord. The keeper measures remaining oil. The fire crackles. Outside, the figures wait. The sea gradually retreats, not quickly. Never quickly enough. The causeway begins reappearing stone by stone. A dark line emerges through the water. Then another section. Then more. The sea reluctantly returns what it borrowed. The keeper watches closely. You realize he is calculating distance, depth, time. Experience has turned such observations into instinct. A surviving account from a monastery near a tidal harbour describes visitors arriving hours later than expected because weather and water refused to cooperate. The writer seemed mildly annoyed by this inconvenience. Medieval documents occasionally remind us that people 800 years ago were perfectly capable of complaining about delays. At last the keeper nods. Now, the villagers begin moving. The crossing is cautious. The donkey clearly dislikes the arrangement. You cannot blame it. Water still swirls across sections of the causeway. The travellers pick their way carefully from stone to stone. The smallest figure nearly slips once. The keeper winces. The boy recovers. The keeper immediately returns to pretending he was not concerned. The procession advances, closer, closer. The tower no longer feels alone. You find that surprising. The physical structure has not changed. The sea still surrounds much of it. The storm still lingers. Yet the presence of approaching people alters everything. Human beings bring stories with them. News, problems, laughter, requests, complaints, fresh information. The tower has spent the night looking outward. Now something is finally coming back. The villagers reach the base of the tower. Voices drift upward through the cold air, muted, indistinct, but unmistakably human. The donkey contributes its own opinion to the conversation. Loudly, the keeper sighs. You hear that every time. Apparently this particular donkey possesses a strong commitment to routine. A knock echoes through the lower door. Solid, real, not chains, not wind, not imagination. Visitors. The keeper stands. For the first time since you arrived, the tower feels connected to the wider world again. The villagers sense supplies, perhaps messages, perhaps gossip. Almost certainly gossip. The door bar lifts. The keeper pulls the door inward. Cold air rushes into the room, along with snow, damp wool, and the sounds of people who have crossed a winter shoreline to reach a lonely tower. The boy steps inside first. His eyes immediately go to the stair leading upward, then the hearth, then the keeper, then you. His grin widens. Outside, the mist still hides the horizon. The sea still growls around the rocks. But inside the keeper's room, the long isolation of the storm begins to loosen its grip as footsteps, voices, and fresh arrivals fill the tower once more. The room fills too quickly. After so many hours with only the keeper, the hearth, and the storm for company, 4 villagers and 1 deeply offended donkey feel like an entire market fair. Damp cloaks steam near the fire. Boots scrape on stone and voices overlap in low greetings, practical questions, and the small complaints people save for weather that has inconvenienced them personally. The boy, apparently Alden's son, stands closest to the hearth with red cheeks and bright eyes. He looks far too awake for someone who has just crossed a half-flood causeway in winter mist. Youth is unfair that way. It treats danger as scenery until experience politely ruins the habit. The donkey remains outside, tied near the lower wall where the wind cannot bully it too badly. Its occasional bray comes through the doorway with perfect timing, as if contributing corrections to the conversation. The keeper bars the door again once the last bundle is inside. The room tightens. Wool, mud, salt, smoke, wet leather, human breath, the smell of outside carried indoors. One villager, a broad woman with a cloth wrapped over her hair, sets down a bundle of firewood. Another man places a small cask of oil near the wall and pats it as though delivering a sleepy child. Alden's boy carries a sack of oats proudly with both arms. The oldest villager, narrow-faced and stooped, brings news. News, in a place like this, weighs more than supplies. The keeper gestures toward the hearth. Warm first, no one argues. Medieval hospitality in hard weather was often practical rather than decorative. Fire mattered, drying mattered, food mattered. Polite ceremony could wait until people stopped shivering. In coastal settlements, survival depended on neighbours who appeared through mist with supplies, rope, tools, and information, even when the journey was unpleasant enough to make everyone silently resent geography. The broad woman removes her wet gloves and holds her hands toward the flame. Saw wreckage on the North Strand. The room changes. Not dramatically. No one gasps. No one drops anything. People who live by the sea do not treat wreckage as impossible. They simply become still. The keeper asks, "Fresh?" She nods. Timber, a small chest broken open, rope, no bodies seen. The boy looks at the floor. For once, even he's quiet. You think of the ship from the night, the pale scrap of sail, the answering lantern, the shape slipping through snow. The keeper's expression remains guarded. "Could be from old breakage." The old man by the door shakes his head. "Not old. Sea brought it after dawn." Silence follows. The fire pops softly. Outside, the donkey brays, possibly offering a legal opinion. The villagers begin unwrapping the supplies. Not because the conversation is over, but because hands need work when the mind does not know where to rest. Bread appears, a small bag of dried peas, 2 candles, a coil of thinner cord, a packet of salt wrapped in cloth, a strip of smoked fish that immediately improves and worsens the smell of the room at the same time. The keeper checks each item. He does not hurry. The routine steadies everyone. Coastal law in the Middle Ages could make wreckage complicated. Goods washed ashore might belong to a surviving owner, a local lord, a monastery, the crown, or whoever had customary rights in that place. Some communities were expected to protect cargo and aid survivors. Others became infamous, fairly or unfairly, for treating wrecks as opportunity. The line between rescue, salvage, duty, hunger, and greed could become painfully thin after a hard winter. The old man lowers himself onto the stool. His knees make a sound that suggests long negotiations with age. "They'll go at low water," he says. The keeper looks at him. "Oh. Who?" "Half the village if they hear." The broad woman snorts. "They've heard her." Of course they have. News travels quickly when it includes the possibility of useful rope. Alden's boy finally speaks. "My father says a good plank is a good plank." The woman gives him a look. "And your father says many things before thinking." The boy accepts this with the resigned expression of a child whose family has been publicly summarized. You sit near the wall, listening. This is no longer only about the ship. It is about winter stores, damaged boats, missing cargo, repair needs, claims, rights, and conscience. A length of rope could mend a fishing net. A plank could repair a roof. A barrel could hold grain. A chest hinge could be reused. In a world where everything requires labour to make, wreckage is not rubbish. It is material, useful material, tempting material. The keeper asks quietly, "Any signal from the harbour?" The old man shakes his head. Bell was heard, then nothing. That faint bell returns in your memory, thin, irregular, almost swallowed by wind. No one mentions ghosts or phantom ships, not directly. But the boy glances toward the shutter, and the broad woman notices. "Don't start filling your head," she says. He mutters, "I didn't. You're about to—" The keeper almost smiles. Some shoreline families warned children that taking goods from a wreck before searching for survivors would bring the sea back to collect payment. Whether people believed this literally mattered less than the lesson beneath it. Look first for the living. Only then count the barrels. Folklore sometimes did the work of morality when officials were too far away and hunger was close at hand. The old man lifts his hands toward the fire. "Priest says wait for the reeve." The broad woman rolls her eyes. "Priest has dry shoes." That earns a few quiet laughs, not cheerful laughter, the kind people use to keep heaviness from settling too deeply. The keeper looks toward the shutter. The mist beyond it presses grey against the boards. Somewhere outside, the tide is turning again, so revealing more of the shore with each retreating pulse. By afternoon, perhaps, the North Strand will lie open enough for villagers to walk it. They will carry hooks, baskets, ropes, poles. They will scan the surf line. They will search for survivors first, because they must. Then they will examine what the sea has left. No one sees this plainly. Everyone knows. The records that survive from coastal disputes often show how messy these situations became. One document might describe lawful salvage. Another might accuse villagers of theft. Another might mention payments, damaged goods, or arguments over jurisdiction. The truth on any given beach likely depended on who arrived first, who survived, who had authority, and how hungry the winter had made everyone. The keeper opens the small cask of oil and sniffs it. He nods. Good enough. Alden's boy beams as if he personally rendered it. The broad woman begins slicing bread. She passes pieces around without ceremony. You accept one gratefully. It is dense, coarse, and slightly stale. Perfect. In other words, conversation resumes in fragments. The harbour road is drifted with snow. A fishing boat broke a mooring but was recovered. Old Mara's roof lost 2 thatch bundles. The chapel door blew open during the night. Someone's goat escaped, then returned on its own, clearly wiser than many humans. The keeper listens to each detail. This, too, is navigation, not of ships, but of community. Who needs help? What broke? What can wait? What cannot? The broad woman eventually points toward the stair. Light, held all night, the keeper says. Held. Her gaze shifts to you. You helped. You nod. She studies your soot-marked sleeves, then gives a brief approving hum, not praise exactly. But perhaps you're learning that approval in this region is distributed in very small, efficient portions, the boy asks. Did you see the ship? The room stills again, the keeper answers before you can. Only light. The boy swallows. Was it theirs? Maybe. Maybe is a hard word. It gives nothing and takes nothing. Outside, the donkey brays again. This time no one laughs. The fire warms the room. Steam rises from drying cloaks. The supplies settle into their places, becoming part of the tower's continued survival. The conversation circles the wreckage, but never lands too long. People know there will be work later. Perhaps grief. Perhaps relief. Perhaps only timber and rope washed from a vessel already gone beyond human reach. For now, the keeper's room holds them. A crowded chamber above a winter sea. A place of warmth. Damp wool, rough bread, and difficult news. And as the storm weakens beyond the walls, salvage talk gathers quietly by the hearth, reminding you that survival along the medieval coast is never only about facing the sea. It is also about what the sea gives back, what it takes away, and what people choose to do when the tide leaves evidence behind. By midday, the villagers are gone. Their footsteps fade down the causeway as the tide continues to pull back from the stones. The donkey leaves last, protesting every slippery patch as though it has been personally betrayed by the coast. Alden's boy turns once to wave at the tower, and this time the keeper lifts his hand without waiting too long. Then the mist closes behind them. The room empties, not immediately in feeling, only in bodies. For a while their presence remains in the air. Damp footprints darken the floor. The fire burns brighter from the wood they brought. The cask of oil rests by the wall, new and full, smelling thickly of fish and smoke. Breadcrumbs lie near the hearth. A strand of wool clings to the door latch. The tower feels larger after they leave, quieter too. You help the keeper put supplies away. Bread goes into cloth, oats into the chest, salt onto the high shelf where damp is less likely to find it. Candles are wrapped carefully and tucked inside a small box, because candles are not casual objects here. They are stored light, measured comfort, little lengths of safety. The keeper rolls the new rope between his hands, testing its twist. Good hemp, he says. This is apparently a glowing review. You carry the smaller bundles to the cupboard. The room settles back into order, but not quite the same order as before. Supplies have changed, and news has changed. The coast outside has changed. Somewhere northward, wreckage lies among stones and weed, and villagers will soon walk the strand with poles and hooks, searching first for life, then for what can be saved. The keeper says little about it. Perhaps he has said all that can be said. Perhaps he knows the sea will provide answers when it chooses. By afternoon, the storm weakens enough to reveal pieces of the world, and a pale strip of cliff appears beyond the mist, then vanishes. The sea remains wild, but its waves have lost some of their earlier fury. They still break hard over the rocks, sending white spray into the air, yet their rhythm is less violent now. The wind no longer slams the tower with sudden anger. It leans instead, steady and cold. The keeper opens the shutter and studies the sky. You stand beside him. Clouds move low and fast. There is no true sunset, only a gradual thickening of grey. The second night is approaching. You feel a strange disappointment at that. Not fear exactly, and more the tired knowledge that the work is not finished. One difficult night has passed, and history, being history, has declined to reward you with a soft bed in a warm inn. Instead, it offers another watch, more oil, more smoke, and another round of negotiating with weather. Very generous. The keeper closes the shutter. We prepare early. So you do. The afternoon becomes a sequence of small tasks. You carry fuel higher in the tower while light still remains. Pieces of wood and charcoal go into the lantern chamber. The new oil is divided between vessels, each one checked for cracks and sealed with cloth. Spare wicks are laid out. The horn is cleaned and placed where it can be reached quickly. The sand bucket is refilled. The repaired shutter bar is tested again. No one makes a ceremony of these actions. That is what makes them feel real. A village church might ring bells for saints and feast days. A lord's hall might display banners. A monastery might mark time with prayer. But here, at the edge of the winter sea, preparation is the ritual. The keeper handles every tool with the same quiet respect others might give to relics. You climb and descend until your legs seem to operate independent from your wishes. The tower grows familiar in layers. The lower room with its hearth and low bed. The tight stair with its damp breath. The upper chamber with its smoke and viewless openings. The beacon waiting above the sea. As evening settles, the keeper lights the main flame before full darkness. The new oil catches with a sharp scent. The fire rises cleanly at first, then settles into a strong yellow glow. He adjusts the draft, watches the smoke, trims one wick before it can misbehave, then stands back. The light gathers strength. Outside, the sea darkens. You look through a gap in the shutter. The coast appears and disappears in torn pieces. The white cliff shows briefly, then mist covers it. The standing stone near the outer rocks reveals itself for a moment, black and wet, then vanishes behind spray. The causeway lies exposed for now, but water already pools in its hollows. Time has become tidal again. The keeper notices you watching it. Before midnight, he says, the path will disappear again. Of course it will. That is the coast keeping its schedule. Some details of places like this survive only indirectly. An expense for oil, a payment for repairs, a note about storm damage, a dispute over salvage, a reference to a light near a harbour mouth, the rest, the cold fingers, the aching legs, the exact smell of damp wool near a fire, rarely enters the record. Yet those ordinary sensations are the real body of the past. The documents are only its footprints. You descend before darkness fully settles. The keeper's room glows warmer now. The hearth has been built up. Supper begins in the pot, a thicker stew this time, with peas from the villager's bundle, onions, oats, and a little smoked fish. Steam softens the air. The smell is hearty enough to make the stone room feel almost domestic. Almost. The shutter rattles. The tower reminds you not to become sentimental. You eat while sitting on the floor near the hearth, because the stool holds a drying cloak and the bed is occupied by a coil of rope. The keeper eats standing for several minutes before remembering that sitting is allowed. Fatigue marks him more clearly tonight. His movements remain precise but slower. He catches you noticing, "Second nights are worse," and you wait for explanation. First night, storm surprises you. Second night, you know it. That is annoyingly wise. Outside, dusk becomes darkness without drama. No clear line divides them. The grey simply deepens until the room's firelight becomes the only honest colour. The beacon above begins its second long watch. You hear it faintly through the tower, not as flame, but as movement. A soft clink when heat shifts metal, a murmur of air in the chamber, the low occasional knock of the loose chain. Still not a ghost, which is comforting but less exciting. Before climbing again, the keeper pauses by the small shelf. He takes the smooth blue glass from the wreck and turns it once in his fingers. Then he sets it down. You wonder whether he's thinking of the ship from last night. He does not say. Instead, he lifts the lantern. You rise. The room feels different as you prepare for the second night. Less strange. More known. That knowledge brings comfort, but also responsibility. You can no longer pretend to be merely a visitor carried along by events. You know where the oil waits. You know how the shutters fail. You know how quickly a flame can weaken. You know what a bell sounds like when it comes from somewhere beyond sight. The keeper opens the stair door. Cold air slips down from above. The lantern flame bends, recovers, and steadies. You follow him upward again, step after turning step. While below you the keeper's room glows with stored warmth, and above you the beacon waits to argue once more with the winter coast. The second night settles differently. The first night arrived like an ambush. This one arrives like a familiar rival. You know the tower now. You know where the stone floor dips near the doorway. You know which stair creaks faintly when stepped on too heavily. You know the smell of fresh oil and the smell of old oil. You know how the sea sounds when the tide is rising and how it sounds when it is merely restless. Knowledge should make the night easier. It does, and it does not. You and the keeper reach the lantern chamber before full darkness has swallowed the coast. For a short time, the fading remains of evening hang over the sea. The white cliff appears once more in the distance. The standing stone near the outer rocks emerges briefly from the gloom. Then both vanish. Night closes around the tower. The beacon becomes the brightest thing for miles. The keeper checks the flame. You check the oil. Neither of you speaks much. The tasks have become familiar enough that words feel unnecessary. Outside, the weather continues improving, at least compared to the fury of the previous night. Yet improvement is a relative concept. The wind still bites, spray still lashes the rocks, snow still drifts through the darkness. The coast has merely downgraded from hostile to unfriendly. A sound reaches you from outside, not a bell, not a ship, ice. At first it resembles tiny pebbles striking wood. Then you realize what is happening. Moisture carried by the wind is freezing onto exposed surfaces. The keeper notices immediately. He moves toward one of the openings. The lantern light reveals a thin, glittering edge forming along part of the outer frame. Ice. The enemy has changed uniforms. You spend the next hour fighting it. Not dramatically. No heroic music plays. No one delivers speeches. You scrape frost from metal fittings. You clear frozen build-up from the edges of shutters. You wipe moisture from orifices before it can harden. The work is strangely satisfying. Simple, immediate, necessary. One task follows another. The keeper hands you a cloth. You wipe condensation from a frame. He checks the flame. You clear another patch of ice. He adjusts a vent. The tower continues breathing. In colder winters, ice could become a serious threat to coastal structures. Frozen spray accumulated on railings, shutters, ropes, and exposed stone. A little caused inconvenience. A great deal caused damage. Mariners sometimes woke to find decks transformed into slippery traps. Lighthouse keepers and watchmen learned quickly that neglecting ice rarely improved the situation. The beacon burned steadily. That helps. The warmth from the flame prevents the worst accumulation nearby. Still, the outer edges of the chamber require constant attention. The keeper scrapes a line of frost from a metal bracket. The sound is sharp and crisp. Tiny fragments scatter across the floor. For a moment they glitter in the firelight like shattered glass. Then they melt. You move to another opening. The view outside steals your attention. The sea looks different tonight. Not calmer, cleaner. The snow has thinned enough for stars to appear through breaks in the clouds. Only a few at first, then more. Their reflections tremble on the black water beyond the surf. You realise this is the first proper glimpse of the sky since arriving at the tower. The sight feels almost shocking after hours of mist, snow, and darkness. The stars seem impossibly distant, and the keeper notices your gaze. Good, is all he says, but you understand stars mean visibility. Visibility means choices. Choices mean survival. For countless generations, sailors looked upward as often as they looked outward. Familiar constellations helped estimate direction. Certain stars became trusted companions. Clouds could remove those companions without warning, which is one reason clear skies were welcomed even when temperatures fell sharply. The keeper points toward the horizon. You follow his gesture. A gap opens in the cloud cover. Far away, a cluster of stars appears. They hang above the sea like tiny lanterns. Then mist drifts across them again. Gone. The moment lasts only seconds. Yet it feels important. A reminder that the world extends far beyond this tower. Beyond the village. Beyond the coast. Beyond the storm. You return to work. More frost. More scraping. More wiping. The night settles into rhythm. Hours pass, almost unnoticed. At one point the keeper sends you below for additional cloth. The descent feels oddly comforting. The room beneath glows with firelight. The hearth remains alive. The bed waits in its corner. The carved ship rests on the shelf. The familiar objects feel almost welcoming. You collect the cloth and pause briefly. The silence surprises you. Without the constant wind of the upper chamber, the room feels sheltered, protected. You understand now why sailors often spoke fondly of small spaces, a narrow cabin, a corner near a hearth, a berth beneath a deck. Comfort is not measured in size, only in security. You climb again. The keeper is waiting near the beacon. The frost battle continues. One particularly stubborn patch has formed along a frame exposed directly to sea spray. The keeper attacks it with the determination of a man settling a personal disagreement. You help. Eventually the ice surrenders. A small victory. The night offers very few large ones. An old saying among sailors suggested that winter never defeats a person all at once. Instead, it tries hundreds of little attacks. A loose glove, a damp boot, a neglected rope, a forgotten latch, and the lesson was simple. Pay attention to small things before they become large problems. The keeper would approve of that philosophy. His entire existence appears built around it. Midnight approaches. The stars come and go behind drifting clouds. The sea remains dark and immense. No ships appear. No bells sound. The coast seems content to rest, or perhaps merely gathering strength for future trouble. The keeper finally sits on a low stool near the wall. A rare concession. You take the opportunity to rest as well. The beacon crackles softly. Warmth brushes your face. Your hands smell of soot and cold iron. The chamber no longer feels intimidating. It feels inhabited, lived in, known. You remember your first climb, the uncertainty, the darkness, the unfamiliar sounds. Now the tower feels almost like a companion, demanding, temperamental, but familiar. The keeper notices your expression. You're learning. You glance around, the flame, the shutters, the frost, the sea beyond. Perhaps you are. Not enough to manage the tower alone, certainly not, but enough to understand why the work matters, enough to hear meaning in the sounds, enough to see danger before it announces itself, enough to appreciate the stubborn beauty of a light kept burning against winter darkness. The night continues. The frost returns. You clear it again. The beacon glows. The stars watch from above whenever the clouds allow, and high above the frozen surf, with numb fingers and tired eyes, you help keep the lantern frame clear while the coast slowly, patiently survives another winter night. Somewhere during the deepest part of the night, you notice the storm is no longer speaking. Not entirely. The sea still moves. The wind still wanders across the coast. The tower still creaks occasionally as old timber adjusts to cold, yet the constant pressure that filled every hour of the previous day has faded. You do not recognize the change immediately. It arrives gradually, a missing sound, a softer gust, a longer silence between waves. The keeper notices first. Of course he does. He has spent too many years in this tower not to hear absence as clearly as presence. He pauses while scraping a trace of frost from a metal fitting, listens, then nods once. The gale's moving away. You look toward the nearest opening. The darkness outside remains vast. The sea remains black. The coast remains hidden. Nothing appears different, yet when you listen carefully, you understand. The wind no longer attacks. It travels. That single difference changes everything. The beacon burns quietly behind you. The warmth on your face feels gentler now. Earlier, every flame seemed locked in battle against weather. Now the light simply exists. Not victorious, not defeated, enduring. The keeper settles onto the stool again. This time he remains seated longer. A rare event. You sit as well. The tower exhales around you. For the first time since arriving, you are not responding to a problem. No shutter needs bracing. No ice demands immediate attention. No bell sounds from the sea. No vessel flashes a desperate lantern through the snow. The coast has granted a brief truce. You accept it gratefully. The silence reveals other things, small things, human things. You notice soot stains on the keeper's sleeves where years of tending the beacon have left permanent marks. You notice repairs on repairs in the leather of his boots. You notice a tiny notch carved into the stool leg beside him. Not one notch, many dozens, perhaps hundreds. He catches you looking. Winter counts. He taps the marks, one cut for each winter spent here. You stare, the wood is crowded with them. The keeper shrugs. Stopped counting proper years. That somehow feels entirely believable. Objects often became personal records in periods when paper was scarce, expensive, or simply inconvenient. A beam might carry marks showing floods. A chest lid might record births. A walking stick could remember journeys. The stool beside the beacon keeper has become a quiet archive of winters. You run a finger near the nearest notch, not touching, just observing. Each mark represents storms. Ships, repairs, cold mornings, long nights, entire seasons compressed into simple cuts in wood. The keeper rises after a while and walks toward the opening. You join him. The sky has changed. Clouds still drift overhead. But now gaps appear more frequently and stars emerge and disappear. One bright point hangs low above the sea before vanishing behind a moving veil of mist. The water reflects faint traces of light. Not much. Enough. The coastline begins reassembling itself. A rock appears, then another. The pale line of surf becomes clearer. The standing stone reveals its silhouette for several moments before darkness swallows it again. The world is returning, slowly. The keeper leans against the stone frame. His shoulders seem less tense. You realize he has spent most of the previous day braced against expectation, waiting for the next problem, watching for failure, listening for danger. Now he simply watches. There is a difference. One weathered tradition among sailors held that the most dangerous moment of a storm came after people believed it had ended. Confidence returned too quickly. Attention wandered. Lines went unchecked. Sails remained unsecured. The lesson lingered for generations: respect the calm, but do not trust it immediately. The keeper appears to follow that philosophy instinctively. Even now he continues checking the flame, checking the shutters, checking the ice, not because conditions demand it, because routine has preserved him longer than luck ever could. You descend briefly to the room below. The stair feels different tonight, less oppressive. The lantern glows warmly in your hand. The stone walls no longer seem to close around you. The bottom, the hearth, still burns, not brightly, just enough. The room carries the smell of smoke, wool, drying wood, and old stone. Comfort. Real comfort this time. Not because conditions are ideal, because familiarity has transformed the place. The bed no longer appears suspicious. The hanging rope feels ordinary. Even the draught near the door has become a known companion. You add a piece of wood to the fire, the flames respond immediately. A shower of sparks rises, then settles. The room glows brighter. You find yourself smiling. That surprises you. When you first entered the tower, every sound seemed threatening, every gust seemed significant, every shadow carried uncertainty. Now the tower feels inhabited by memory rather than danger. You climb back upward. The keeper remains near the beacon. He has discovered something, not alarming, interesting, a feather, tiny, grey, trapped near one of the openings. The wind must have carried it inside. He lifts it carefully. The feather rests on his palm, weightless, absurdly delicate compared to the stone tower surrounding it. "Seabird," he says. You both study it. Then he places it on a shelf beside the smooth shell and the blue glass from the wreck. Another small artifact. Another reminder that the outside world occasionally enters, not through doors, through chance. A surprising amount of what survives from the medieval world reaches us by accident. A lost shoe in mud, a broken comb in a ditch, a coin drop beneath floorboards, a feather trapped where no one bothered to sweep. History often depends less on importance than on luck. The beacon crackles. The keeper stretches. His joints protest audibly. The night continues softening. The sea remains restless, but no longer furious. The sky reveals more stars. The coast grows clearer. The tower itself seems lighter. Not physically, emotionally. You know dawn will come eventually. Not soon, but eventually. The thought changes the character of the night. Every watch now feels like progress rather than endurance. The keeper notices it too. You can tell. He spends longer looking outward than listening inward. The difference is subtle, meaningful. Together you stand near the opening. The cold air brushes your face or far below. Waves slide over rocks with a sound closer to conversation than violence. The standing stone remains visible. The cliff returns. The surf gleams faintly. The storm has not vanished. It has merely moved on, and in its wake, the lighthouse keeper's tower discovers small traces of ordinary life again. A feather, a stool marked by winters, a shelf of collected fragments, a hearth waiting below. The details seem insignificant, yet they are the things you remember, long after the fiercest gusts are forgotten. It is often the smallest human traces that remain. Eventually, the night loosens its grip, not all at once. The darkness simply becomes less certain. The stars above the sea begin fading one by one. The black line between water and sky grows softer. The beacon still burns strongly behind you, yet for the first time in many hours, it is no longer the only light in the world. The keeper notices before you do. Of course he does. He has spent enough winters here to recognize dawn long before it becomes visible. He walks to the opening and studies the eastern horizon. You join him. The view has transformed. The storm has finally retreated far enough to reveal the coast. Not perfectly, but Patches of mist still wander across the water. Snow lingers on the cliffs. Clouds drift overhead. Yet the landscape exists again. The world has returned. Below the tower, waves break across the rocks in long bands of white foam. Beyond them, the shoreline curves northward toward the strand where wreckage was reported. The standing stone remains visible now, dark and patient among the surf. Farther inland, the pale outline of the village appears through the morning haze. The sight feels almost startling. After so many hours spent trapped within darkness, distance itself seems new. The keeper closes the shutter. Low tide soon. Those 3 words become the morning's purpose. You descend together. The stair no longer feels like a tunnel. Grey light enters through every slit. The stone walls glow softly. The lower room greets you with the familiar smell of smoke, wool, and old timber. The fire has nearly burned down. The keeper feeds it automatically. He could probably do the task asleep. A small kettle is hung above the flames. Breakfast follows, simple, predictable, welcome, bread, cheese, warm drink. You eat quietly. The room feels peaceful, not because nothing remains to do, because the worst has passed. After the meal, the keeper reaches for a heavier cloak, then a walking staff, then a coil of rope. You already know the shoreline awaits, the wreckage, the tide, the morning survey. The tower door opens, cold air enters, fresh air, sea air, daylight air. You step outside for the first time since arriving. The sensation surprises you. The ground feels wider. The sky feels enormous. The tower rises behind you, taller than it seemed from within. Its stone walls carry stains left by countless storms. The upper lantern chamber appears small against the morning sky. You turn once and look upward. The beacon still glows faintly. Its work is nearly finished for the day. The causeway stretches before you, fully exposed now. Wet stone gleams beneath a pale winter sun struggling through cloud. You and the keeper begin walking. The sea remains close. Always close, waves move beside the path, sliding across rocks polished by centuries of water. Seaweed drapes itself over stone ledges. Small pools remain trapped among the rocks, reflecting the sky. Your boots crunch occasionally on thin patches of ice. The keeper moves steadily, not quickly. He knows exactly where to place each step. The path bears signs of long use. Stones have shifted over generations. Repairs appear here and there. One section contains timber supports darker than the rest, likely replaced years earlier. Another stretch shows fresh patches of gravel. Nothing on the coast remains untouched for long. The sea edits constantly. You reach the mainland. The shore opens before you. Winter sunlight spreads weakly across snow-covered grass and scattered stones. Gulls circle overhead, their cries sharper now that the storm is gone. The keeper heads north, toward the strand. You follow. The beach reveals evidence long before the wreckage itself appears. A piece of rope lies tangled among seaweed. Farther on, a broken plank rests half buried in sand. Then another. Then a barrel stave. The sea has left a trail. You stop beside a section of timber. The wood is weathered, but recently broken. One edge remains pale where the grain split. The keeper kneels briefly. His fingers examine the surface. He says nothing. Yet you can tell he's reading information hidden within the object. Age, quality, origin perhaps. A practiced eye sees more than yours. Farther ahead, footprints crisscross the beach. Villagers have already arrived. Of course they have. The broad woman from yesterday stands near a cluster of debris. Alden's boy is there too, carrying something proudly under one arm. Several others move slowly along the strand, scanning the shoreline. Nobody appears excited, only focused. The work feels methodical. A chest lid, a length of rope, a section of mast, useful things, sad things. The sea rarely separates the two. The boy approaches carrying a carved piece of wood. Figurehead. Not really. More likely decoration from somewhere aboard. Still, it fascinates him. The keeper examines it, hands it back. The boy beams. Nearby, villagers stack recovered materials into neat piles. Timber with timber, rope with rope, metal with metal. No one speaks loudly. The atmosphere resembles a churchyard, more than a marketplace. People move carefully, respectfully. You walk farther down the strand. The tide has revealed more clues. Fragments of pottery, broken pegs, a small leather pouch swollen with seawater. The pouch attracts attention. Several villagers gather around it. When opened, it contains nothing valuable, only ruined papers, water-stained straps, writing blurred beyond recognition. For a moment everyone stares, then someone shrugs. The sea has claimed whatever story those pages once carried. The keeper watches quietly. His gaze moves beyond the debris, toward the water, still searching. You realize what he seeks: survivors. There are none. At least none visible. Only wreckage. The sea keeps its secrets. Alden's boy eventually wanders over. He points toward a distant rock. Found a boot there. You look. The boot sits upside down near the tide line. Small, ordinary, yet strangely moving. Some unknown sailor wore it. Now it rests alone on a winter beach. History often survives through objects like that. Not grand treasures, not royal crowns, a boot, a spoon, a comb, a piece of glass. Everyday things that outlast the people who carried them. The keeper eventually turns back toward the tower. The villagers continue working. The beach continues yielding fragments. The tide continues retreating. Morning advances. As you walk homeward across the causeway, you glance behind one last time. The strand appears busy now. Small figures moving among driftwood and surf. Gathering, sorting, remembering. The lighthouse tower rises ahead, steady, familiar. The beacon above is no longer visible in daylight, yet you know it remains there, waiting, ready for another night if needed. You and the keeper cross the final stretch of stone. The sea slides gently beside the path. The storm has passed. The coast endures. And beneath the pale winter sky, the morning survey comes to an end, leaving behind footprints, wreckage, and quiet reminders of how closely life and sea remain intertwined. The tower looks different when you return, not because it has changed, because you have. The stone walls rise above the shoreline exactly as they did when you first arrived. The lantern chamber still crowns the top. The narrow windows still stare toward the sea. The causeway still stretches across rock and tide. Yet now the tower feels familiar. You know its sounds, you know its smells. You know which step on the stair feels slightly uneven beneath your boot. You know where the wind finds its way through cracks and where warmth gathers near the hearth. The keeper walks ahead of you. Neither of you speaks much. The beach or the wreckage, and the long night have exhausted the need for conversation. The door opens. Warmth greets you. Not abundant warmth, not luxurious warmth. Enough. The hearth burns steadily. The room carries the scent of wood smoke and drying wool. The carved ship still rests on its shelf. The blue fragment of glass catches a trace of daylight. The feather from the night before remains where the keeper placed it. The little collection looks larger now. Not physically, meaningfully. Each object seems connected to a story. A storm, a voyage, a winter, a memory. The keeper hangs his cloak near the fire. You do the same. The room settles around you. Outside, the sea continues its endless movement. Inside, the tower returns to ordinary life. The keeper begins cleaning tools. A cloth moves across metal. A hook is returned to its peg. A knife is sharpened lightly. Nothing dramatic. The storm has ended. But work remains. That seems to be one of history's favourite lessons. The moment a crisis passes, someone still needs to sweep the floor. You help where you can. The oil vessels are checked. The remaining fuel is counted. The spare rope is coiled neatly. A damaged cloth from the lantern chamber is cut into smaller pieces for future repairs. Nothing is wasted. The tower has taught you that. A rope rarely dies all at once. It becomes shorter, then shorter again, then perhaps part of a net, then perhaps binding, then kindling. Life on a hard coast encourages creativity. The afternoon passes quietly. Sunlight finally reaches the room through the shutter. A thin beam crosses the floor. Dust drifts through it. The sight feels strangely beautiful after so much darkness. The keeper notices you watching. Rare enough. Winter light is precious here. It arrives late, leaves early, and spends much of its time hiding behind clouds. You sit near the hearth. The fire crackles softly. Outside, gulls wheel above the shore. Their cries drift through the shutter. The sea sounds calmer now. Not silent, never silent, simply calmer. The difference feels enormous. The keeper eventually retrieves the stool marked with winter notches. He turns it over, examines the newest cut, then sets it back beside the hearth. The gesture feels as almost ceremonial. One more storm survived, one more winter notch earned. You wonder how many of those marks correspond to nights like the one you have just experienced. How many storms? How many lost ships? How many quiet dawns? The stool keeps its secrets. The room grows brighter, then softer, then warmer. The tension of the previous days slowly drains away. For the first time since arriving, you allow yourself to relax completely. No bell demands attention. No ship flashes signals through snow. No shutter rattles violently. No ice gathers along the frame. The tower stands. The beacon rests. The sea breathes. And that is enough. The keeper pours 2 cups. You accept one. The drink is simple. The moment is not. For a while, both of you sit without speaking. The silence feels comfortable now. Companionable. Outside, the tide begins another cycle. Far below, water returns to rocks abandoned only hours earlier. The standing stone will soon find itself surrounded again, and the causeway will vanish and reappear. The sea will continue doing what it has always done. The tower will continue answering with light. That rhythm existed before either of you arrived. It will continue long after. The keeper eventually glances toward the shelf. Toward the blue glass, the feather, the shell, the old hook. He does not explain why he keeps them. He does not need to. People collect reminders, proof that moments happened, proof that storms ended, proof that journeys occurred. The tower itself is one enormous collection of such reminders. Every repair, every scratch, every stain, every worn step. Each one records a life lived against the edge of the sea. The daylight slowly fades, not into another storm. Simply into evening, a peaceful evening, the kind that feels almost unfamiliar after difficult weather. You hear distant voices from the village carried faintly across the water. A dog barks somewhere inland. A gull answers. Ordinary sounds, the most comforting sounds of all. The keeper rises. He checks the beacon one final time before night. Not because danger threatens, because that's what he does. Routine remains even when storms leave. You follow him up the stair. One last climb. The lantern chamber greets you with fading sunlight and clear views across the coast. The sea stretches outward beneath a pale sky. The village rests quietly beyond the shoreline. The strand where wreckage was found lies calm now. The standing stone watches the surf. Everything appears still. The keeper lights the beacon. The flame catches smoothly in no struggle, no urgency. Just a warm, golden glow spreading through the chamber. You stand beside him. Together you watch the first light of evening touch the coast. The world feels larger now. safer, gentler. The storm belongs to memory. The beacon belongs to the present, and somewhere far beyond the horizon, ships continue sailing. Some crews may glimpse this light tonight. Most will never know the names of the people who keep it burning. That seems fitting. Many important tasks in history happen quietly, without recognition, without reward, simply because someone needed to do them. You descend once more to the keeper's room. The hearth glows, the blanket waits. The room welcomes you like an old friend. Outside, the sea continues its endless conversation with the shore. Inside, warmth gathers around stone and timber. The tower no longer feels lonely, it feels lived in. And as evening settles gently over the medieval coast, you return to the keeper's room, carrying with you the memory of storms, lights, waves, and winter nights that now seem distant and strangely peaceful. The fire crackles softly, the wind whispers beyond the walls, the sea rolls in and out beneath a fading sky. And little by little, everything grows quiet for now. Let your thoughts drift like the tide slipping across dark sand. The storm has passed. The beacon burns steadily above. The tower stands exactly where it has always stood, watching the sea with patient stone eyes. You settle beneath the blanket. The rough wool feels warm now, familiar. The mattress no longer complains quite so loudly beneath your weight. The hearth glows red and gold across the room, painting soft shapes on the walls. Outside, waves continue their endless journey towards shore, not violent, not threatening, just rhythmic, steady, comforting. The keeper moves quietly somewhere nearby, checking one final detail before sleep. A tool returns to its peg, a log settles in the fire. Then even those small sounds fade. The room grows still. You think about the causeway appearing and disappearing beneath the tide, the standing stone waiting among the rocks, the villagers crossing through mist, the distant ship glimpsed through snow, the tiny lantern answering from the darkness. All those moments seem softer now, further away, like footprints slowly filling with water. The sea keeps moving. The stars continue their silent paths above the coast. The beacon shines outward into the night, asking for nothing, expecting nothing, simply offering light to anyone who may need it. You breathe the scent of wood smoke and salt. You listen to the hush of water below the tower. You feel the warmth of the hearth and the safety of thick stone walls, and little by little, the coast becomes quieter. The waves become gentler. The room becomes warmer. Your thoughts become lighter, until there is only the steady glow of the fire, the distant whisper of the sea, and the calm certainty that the tower will keep watch through the night. Sleep comes easily now. The storm is gone, the light remains, and the medieval coast drifts peacefully into darkness. Sweet dreams.